The year is 1987, and American TV networks launch a number of short-lived shows, such as Starman, The Popcorn Kid, and Probe. In a fit of midlife nostalgia and an effort to remind the world of shows they have forgotten, lone podcast pilot Chris Cooling steps into the Forgotten TV studio 30 years later. From well-remembered to obscure TV memories of the 70s and 80s, including short-lived TV shows and made-for-TV movies, this is Forgotten TV. Welcome to Forgotten TV. I am your host, Chris Cooling. Remember that you can support Forgotten TV on Patreon for as little as $1 a month and become a producer of Forgotten TV. Patreon supporters gain access to Forgotten TV Supplemental, additional podcasts that go beyond the information presented in the show. More on this during the end credits. Links for all the ways to support Forgotten TV are easily seen right here on your device in the show notes or at forgotten.tv. This episode of Forgotten TV was brought to you by executive producers Will Welton and Doc Pinko. Thanks to all for your support of Forgotten TV. Whiz Kids, Part 2, Behind the Scenes. This is Part 2 of Forgotten TV's consideration of the 1983 CBS TV series Whiz Kids. Part 1 related the previously untold origins of the show, how concepts by both writer-producers Bob Shayne and Phil DeGuere were combined into the show we eventually saw aired, and featured a breakdown of each episode, including some behind-the-scenes details relevant to each one. So if you haven't yet, go back and listen to Part 1. On this installment, we'll dig deep behind the scenes of the overall series, look into criticisms of the show, technical details, locations, actors, as well as hear from Bob Shayne himself in the interview segment. Recall where we were technologically in 1983. The year of Microsoft Word 1.1. Apple's $10,000 Lisa computer with its modern graphical user interface was released and would utterly fail in the marketplace. IBM offers its XT computer with 10-megabyte hard drive, 128K of RAM, monitor and printer, all for $5,000. The new compact disc format was released. Nintendo releases the Mario Bros. Arcade game, and Atari's Crystal Castles debuts, which I was known to play, gulping down far too much Coca-Cola between levels at yesterday's arcade at the new San Jacinto Mall in town. Of course, no visit would be complete without some Corn Dog 7 and a visit to the Cinema 6, where you could catch Richard Pryor's antics in The Toy, an encore showing of E.T., or see World War III narrowly averted in War Games. Like many, I saw the premiere of Whiz Kids one Wednesday night, October 5th, 1983. Even though we were Fall Guy watchers, the family deferred to my viewing choice. Reluctantly, I'm sure. I watched the first 8 episodes before our family's TV was sold and we moved into a camper for about 5 months for our Western U.S. adventure and spent most of 1984 without a TV. It ends up I left the show almost the same time Bob Shayne did, and didn't see the rest of the episodes until 10 years ago when I found them online. Let's begin by talking about the term Whiz Kids. For nearly 80 years, child prodigies who excel in one field or another, many times to the level of an adult expert, have been referred to as Whiz Kids. Whiz Kids, as a generic phrase, has been used a number of times over the decades. I find references to Whiz Kids referring to the 1942 University of Illinois men's basketball team, the 10 young Army Air Force statistical experts hired by Henry Ford II in 1945. In the 1940s and 50s, a game show called Quiz Kids aired on radio and later television for some 16 years.
We're on the air with the School Kids Questionnaire, brought to you by the makers of Alka-Seltzer and One-A-Day brand vitamin tablets. And here they are, the Quiz Kids.
Among several panelists that became notable in their fields was a 12-year-old Harvey Bennett.
I'm Harvey Bennett Fishman. I'm 12 years old, and I'm in 7A at the Bradwell School in Chicago,
who became a television and film writer and producer of many TV shows of the 70s and the Star Trek films of the 1980s. Anecdotally, the title of this show seems to be incorrectly remembered by some as Whiz Kids, and this may have encouraged the general use of this term, such as referring to the roster of the 1950 Philadelphia Phillies. And there are additional times this phrase has been used. The first time I find evidence for its use in referring to computers was in the Whiz Kids comics, published for Radio Shack, that started being distributed in 1980. Initially called the TRS-80 Whiz Kids, the first 3 books in this series were produced by DC Comics. These are the best remembered because they featured the DC Comics superheroes Superman, Supergirl, and Wonder Woman. The comic books focused on classmates Alec and Shanna and their teacher, Ms. Wilson. Alec and Shanna were the so-called TRS-80 computer whiz kids. Ms. Wilson, her students, and the many visitors to the classroom all made frequent use of many different Radio Shack products, which ended up helping the superheroes save the day. The final 8 comic books were produced by Archie Comic Publications. These books kept the characters of Alec, Shanna, and Ms. Wilson, but eliminated the Metropolis setting and the superheroes, and continued being published until 1992. Any teacher writing on school letterhead could request a free packet of 50 comic books from Radio Shack, and I recall getting Mrs. Huff to request some. Interesting note, Bob Shayne was not aware of this comic series and was not a user of computers at the time, still hammering out scripts the old-fashioned way on a manual typewriter. As we'll examine in detail, Phil was the complete opposite. He subscribed to half a dozen computer magazines and undoubtedly knew his way around a Radio Shack, and very possibly was aware of the comic series prior to coming up with the show title in that original pitch meeting. Let's take a look at the background of the cast prior to the show. Matthew Laberto was the most well-known and experienced actor among the young cast. He had been acting on film and TV since 1974, before he was 8 years old, in over 20 different films and TV shows, such as The Bob Newhart Show, Mary Hartman, and the TV movie Tarantulas, The Deadly Cargo. He was a regular on the Saturday morning children's series The Red Hand Gang, seen on NBC in 1977, about 5 crime-solving 10-year-olds and their dog Boomer, who later actually got his own show. Then in 1978, he joined the cast of Little House on the Prairie as the Ingalls' adopted son, Albert, until nearly the conclusion of that series in early 1983. Matthew was a video game enthusiast. He regularly competed at Atari video game tournaments. He was good enough that Atari asked him to be a goodwill ambassador for the company, and he became a member of their youth advisory board. Although he was a video game champion, ranking 10th nationwide in Centipede, he didn't really know a lot about computers when he got cast as Richie. But as he told Enter Magazine, Atari gave him a 1200 XL computer in the summer of 1983, the same type he used on screen in Episode 9, on which he learned how to type. Thanks to the 1200, I learned how to type before Whiz Kids began shooting. That made my character at least look like he knew what he was doing. On my lunch hour or during breaks in shooting, I'll sit down at the Apple and learn. Primarily languages like BASIC and Logo. Matthew turned 17 in the middle of the season. Todd Porter, according to the teen magazines of the time, was an actor-model at age 8, appearing in TV commercials and print ads. By age 12, he was in the Saturday morning children's series Star Stuff, seen in the local Philadelphia market only. In an interesting coincidence, the series ran 18 episodes and was about a young boy that built a homebrew computer, who was able to communicate with a girl named Ingrid from the future. He also voiced Pinocchio in the Rankin-Bass animated special Pinocchio's Christmas, and was in the 1981 movie Earthbound with Burl Ives. He was cast in the role of Richie's friend, the athletic Hamilton Parker, at 14, and turned 15 prior to filming regular series episodes. Jeffrey Jacquet had been seen in the films Return from Witch Mountain and Holy Moses, and had a recurring role on the first season of Mork and Mindy as Eugene, the neighborhood boy that took music lessons from Mindy's father. He was excited to be cast as Jeremy Saldino in Whiz Kids, as he told Enter Magazine. As soon as I started preparing for the part, I just wanted to go into more depth with computers. There's always something new that you can do on a computer. I write all sorts of programs. I never have a chance to be bored anymore. His exuberant personality came through in his performance, as did his Your Mama ad-libs, which made it into episodes. He was the only black actor in any new CBS show that season, which was noted in Ebony magazine. Jeffrey turned 17 during series filming. Andrea Elson was the youngest of the Whiz Kids, being cast as Alice Tyler at age 13 and turning 14 during pilot filming. She had done some TV commercials, and this was her first regular series role. Young Melanie Gaffin played Cheryl, the 7-year-old sister of Richie. She had been seen in the 1982 film The Entity and on a few episodes of the series Taxi. She turned 10 during series filming. Madelyn Cain was a relative newcomer to the small screen, having been seen in a handful of TV guest appearances before being cast as Irene Adler, mother to whiz kid Richie. If the character name sounds familiar, it was Bob Shayne's nod to Sherlock Holmes. The Irene Adler character only appeared in one original Holmes story, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but has been used in numerous film, radio, and TV adaptations, including the recent Sherlock on the BBC and Elementary on CBS. Max Gail was fresh off his role as Detective Stan Wojciechowicz on 7 years of the sitcom Barney Miller. After the critical reception we'll examine in a minute, CBS felt the original reporter character of Gallagher in the pilot, played by Michael Horton, was too young, and they desired an older actor to supervise the Whiz Kids. Gail was Phil DeGuere's choice to play new character Farley. However, producer and co-creator Bob Shayne felt he wasn't right for the role. According to Bob, Gail wanted to depict Farley as an aging hippie type and inject some political viewpoints into the character, resulting in some behind-the-scenes friction. After Bob Shayne left, Gail was given the opportunity to direct Episode 13, Made in the USA. A. Martinez was Police Lieutenant Neil Quinn, married to Farley's sister, and Whiz Kids was only his second regular series role. He had been a series regular on The Cowboys in 1974, as well as over 50 appearances as a guest actor. Linda Scruggs played Ms. Vance, the sometimes seen teacher at Canyon High School. The character was named after Linda's high school guidance counselor. Prior to Whiz Kids, she was known for appearing on series like Starsky and Hutch, Bob Black Sheep, and Simon and Simon. She performed a lot of additional behind-the-scenes tasks on Whiz Kids, as well as Simon and Simon you aren't going to see listed on IMDb. You see, she was married to executive producer Phil DeGuere. She did location scouting for the show, worked on wardrobe, set decoration, acted as liaison between cast and crew and the producers, organized holiday parties for the crew, and it was Linda who bought Phil his first Apple computer. Linda looked after the kids like family, even though there were several moms on set, and was the confidant of several of the cast and crew. The house that was used for the exterior shots of Richie's house, as well as streets used for the bike riding scenes, was in a Calabasas, California neighborhood. It's actually not too hard to track down. The street name is seen in the opening segment. It's also listed as a filming location on IMDb. The house used in one episode as Ham's house was right next door, so I guess you could say Ham was Richie's next-door neighbor. Technical consultant on the show Kurt Borg lived half a mile away in the same Calabasas neighborhood. Michael Hill from the Baltimore Sun correctly noted the Spielbergian appearance of the neighborhood, as well as the kids riding the bicycles used on the show appearing to be right out of E.T. This was indeed intentional, according to Linda Scruggs, intended to evoke a sense of familiarity in the viewer to that warmly received film. The school scenes were shot at the real Canyon High School in Santa Clarita, California. There is no way they would have ridden their bikes there, as it is a 45-minute trip by car up the 405. The high school can be seen in the Netflix series Santa Clarita Diet. While filming, a girl named Beth worked up the courage to knock on Matthew's trailer and invite him to the school's Sadie Hawkins dance, and he accepted. She still has the photos of their date today. The interiors were shot on sound stages at Universal Studios, Stage 31. Let's expand on the details regarding Whiz Kids going to series at CBS. Once the $2+ million pilot was shot and delivered to CBS in April 1983, it performed well when it was shown to test audiences. According to Phil DeGuere, it tested particularly well with young viewers. Our research indicates support from every demographic group except men 30+, who are threatened by it. They are precisely the age group most threatened by computers, which figure in the show, and threatened by potent teenagers, and men over 30 make up most of the villains on TV. When screened for affiliate stations, advertisers, and critics during the May network upfronts, however, and again at a June press conference for TV critics, the response was not as positive. Even though CBS President Gene Jankowski gave it his thumbs up, announcing to the assembled crowd, "I liked it, and I hope audiences will too." Comments from advertisers and affiliate station owners voiced concerns over the activities the Whiz Kids engaged in. TV critic Marilyn Preston called the pilot appalling instead of appealing, and went on to list all the naughty things the kids engaged in. The Pittsburgh Press's review proclaimed CBS's Whiz Kids could get straight A's in crime. Harvey Shepard, senior vice president of programs at CBS, said, "A number of people mentioned that this is an area we should be quite sensitive about, and we agreed with them." CBS representatives met with the producers, the first of many meetings, some articles claim, to emphasize that storylines for the series should be changed so that access to computers has to be through legal means. CBS also wanted the newspaper reporter character to play a more supervisory role. They felt that the character of Gallagher was too young and close in age to the kids, which was actually the intention of Bob Shayne, that he be a younger adult and a bridge from the kids to the adults of the world. However, the decision was made to replace him with the older character of Farley, as we've seen, as well as add an authority figure as a regular character in the form of a police lieutenant related to Farley, Lieutenant Quinn. Initially defending the pilot to the press, even slamming his fist on the table in irritation of the criticism at that Phoenix press conference in June. After meetings with CBS, executive producer Phil DeGuere contritely gave this statement.
Because we are a show with kids on television, the last thing we want to do is be accused of setting undesirable role models.
Regarding how computer hacking would be handled going forward, he added,
We want to show the vicarious fun of it, but we will structure it so it is clearly a bad guy's computer system. That's a nice way of having your cake and eating it too, by doing something slightly mischievous and at the same time only bringing it down on bad people.
Between that press conference and the October 5th premiere, DeGuere continued to edit and tweak elements of the pilot. For example, one change that was made was when Richie accessed the Gazette computer. A line was added, making it clear Gallagher had given him a password to use. One deletion was Richie lying to his mom about his whereabouts the prior night. DeGuere went over scripts for series episodes for other opportunities like this. He wanted to give
an accurate picture of what you can do with a computer terminal, if you know how, and what you should and shouldn't do.
The first episode written, A Chip Off the Old Block, guest starring Robbie Rist, was Phil's Mea Culpa episode, intended to show consequences for illegal activities. This episode was very interesting for another reason. By now, you may have noticed a different narrative presented in these podcasts than what you may have read online regarding the origins of the show. According to numerous interviews Phil DeGuere appeared in, he always said he came up with the concept of the show back in 1981. Yet, Bob Shayne's account relates the original concept of the show was his Hardy Boys Done Right idea pitched in late 1982 to Universal, with Phil adding the computer aspect as well as the title in the pitch meeting. I believe Phil's creative ideas that got integrated into Whiz Kids did indeed begin back in the summer of 1981. It was then that he wrote an episode called Trapdoors that became the third episode of Simon and Simon. In it, a young hacker played by then 17-year-old Robbie Rist breaks into a bank's computer with his Apple II and steals modest amounts of money. The vice manager of the bank branch then forces the boy to help him steal even more money. These are clearly plot elements that were ported over into Chip Off the Old Block, even getting Robbie to return as guest actor. When producing Trapdoors, Phil had to have realized the series' potential of depicting what teenagers could do with computers. This seed of an idea then sprouted when Bob Shayne came along with his modern-day Hardy Boys concept. This 1981 Simon and Simon could thus be seen as sort of a proto-Whiz Kids episode. Also, note that this was 1981, making this quite possibly the first depiction of computer hacking on television. As the scheduled September 28th premiere date neared, DeGuere expressed concern that the show would be competing with late-season baseball and pushed for a late October premiere. CBS only gave him 1 week and moved the date to October 5th. Even with the changes made, the critics still raked the pilot over the coals, some still basing their criticisms on the press pilot screening before changes were made.
Whiz Kids, a new CBS program debuting tonight, does not make a whimper on the sex and violence scale, yet it may be more dangerous to children than anything on television this season,
proclaimed an indignant Fred Rothenberg in an AP article that ran nationwide the day of premiere. Articles titled, Whiz Kids No Good for Youngsters, and Whiz Kids Not Good Role Models, and Program Rife with Uncomfortable Ideas, peppered newspapers throughout October. The fact that real-life Whiz Kids wouldn't stay out of the news fueled a lot of this negative publicity, as we shall see, as well as the ongoing popularity of War Games, the 5th highest-grossing movie that year, still playing in theaters, with even Congress taking the movie seriously now that it was back in session. DeGuere was asked about the Whiz Kids influencing illegal activities, often enough that he eventually drafted a position statement for the press.
The creators and producers of Whiz Kids are fully aware of the responsibility to present our stories in a manner that fosters, among young people, a clear understanding of their obligations to obey laws. If there is any instance in which any of the young protagonists use computer access in a manner of questionable legality, this fact will be made apparent. It will not appear that the act is condoned, and they will be suitably and quickly reprimanded.
Bob Shayne, the hands-on day-to-day producer of the first half of the season, recalls no such directives, nor the controversy stirred up by the press. However, he was busy producing the show and not taking press interviews. Plus, as executive producer and face man for the series, DeGuere would have been the one dealing with the press, the network, and the studio. Even Matt Laberto defended the show to the press, saying in a UPI article,
"There are no written laws about computers, but the press tore us up over our pilot show for doing illegal things. That's not fair. Some of the things kids do with computers may be morally wrong, but not legally. On our show, the kids are like Robin Hood. They use the computer to help the law."
The press wasn't all bad. Variety appropriately said,
"Put simply, Whiz Kids is the Hardy Boys with a computer. It has this group of scrupulously neat, bright youngsters out to combat whoever may be evil, aided considerably by Ralph, their talking robotic computer."
And Michael Hill of the Baltimore Sun said,
"Whiz Kids computes into a fairly good show."
And the Youth in Film Awards also recognized the show with a nomination for Best New Television Series, along with Webster, Mr. Smith, Jennifer Slept Here, Boone, and Goodnight Beantown, which took the award. The Youth in Film Awards also recognized all the young actors with nominations, with the exception of Andrea Elson, again inexplicably left out. Another issue this show and others dealt with early in the TV season was the very busy news cycle, competing with the nation's attention at the time. You had Hurricane Alicia in August cause mass evacuations on the Gulf Coast and killing 21 people. Many returned to damaged or destroyed homes and had their lives disrupted for months. The Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars program, and Cold War issues were in the news. In late October, the U.S. invaded Grenada. 2 weeks later, the U.S. Capitol bombing. And Todd Porter correctly pointed out Whiz Kids was once totally preempted for coverage of President Reagan's press conference regarding crises in Lebanon and Nicaragua. At mid-season, the show was on the bubble in TV speak, unsure if CBS was going to cancel it or keep it until the end of the season. In mid-December, Whiz Kids was given the green light for the rest of the season. But as you know, this came with the catch of the show moving to Saturday nights at 8, 7 Central. While on Wednesday night, much of the potential audience was probably watching The Fall Guy, on Saturday it was up against established shows T.J. Hooker and the Different Strokes Silver Spoons Hour. Add the fact that literally half the time CBS preempted it for animated holiday specials, a longer-than-normal Saturday night movie, or experimenting with the Dukes of Hazzard in that time slot. It didn't have a chance. The other crisis facing the show at midseason was the departure of producer Bob Shayne. Citing the increasing difficulty of getting along with executive producer Phil DeGuere, Shayne left the show and was replaced by James Crocker. There was also a directive from the studio, the network, or possibly both, to make an attempt to widen the appeal of the show to a more adult audience than what was the original concept. Thus, stories became darker and emphasized the Cold War issues of the time. More tinkering with the show concept came with the addition of Carson Marsh and the Athena Society. This mysterious organization appeared to be an NGO that was well-funded, with multiple branches across the country, or perhaps the world. Just what the Athena Society did was unclear, but they had contacts with all the three-letter governmental agencies. How newspaper reporter Farley was aware of such a secretive organization was not revealed. The addition of a third adult guiding the kids meant this yet was another character that had to be consulted each episode, further complicating the show. When a show tinkers with its original core concept, it rarely results in an improvement. In fact, it ironically fell into the same trap as did the Hardy Boys, as those producers repeatedly retooled the show, abandoning the original concept of episodes based on the original books, making the show darker in tone, and by the third season, had them working for the Justice Department. Also, recall Bob Shayne's original intended audience for Whiz Kids, as expressed to Universal Television head Robert Harris, was for young viewers on early Sunday evening, opposite CBS's 60 Minutes at 7 p.m. 6 Central. When CBS then picked up the show, this threw a wrench into Bob's original concept, meaning the target audience would have to change now that it would be slotted in regular prime time. Indeed, Bob expressed disappointment with CBS, even upon news they picked up the show for the fall season, as he told Forgotten TV.
I remember feeling kind of empty and angry rather than elated. I think because I knew the show couldn't succeed in an 8 o'clock time slot, and could have been a long-running hit on a different network, Sundays at 7, and because I think Universal had already started their push to make the series more adult-skewing, which I was against. The whole journey had started out with me saying to Robert, 6 or so months earlier, let's do the Hardy Boys right, and Phil adding, and give them a computer, and it ended up with the studio and the network making ostensibly the same mistakes they'd made on the Hardy Boys.
Not long after the move to Saturday night, likely in February, the decision was made to cancel Whiz Kids, although this was not announced to the public. With CBS still having an outstanding order of 3 more episodes, these went into production, with the cast and crew knowing these were the final 3. Writer-producer Craig Buck was brought on to supervise script development as story consultant for these last 3 produced episodes, and he shared his thoughts with Forgotten TV on his time on Whiz Kids.
The series had already been canceled, but they had an outstanding order for 3 more episodes. I agreed to come on board as a story consultant to supervise 2 episodes that had already been assigned, and to write and produce the 3rd, Father's Day. I got to produce as sort of a carrot to persuade me to take the job, since the series was already DOA. I remember it well, because it was my first producing credit.
After the final 3 produced episodes aired, on June 2nd, the final episode aired, one that had been produced early in the season, but was the victim of one of the many preemptions the show had over the course of its short life. Let's now take a look at some upbeat behind-the-scenes info on Whiz Kids. The first half of the season made repeated use of mentioning the NASCorp company whenever a corporation was needed in the storyline. What did NASCorp stand for? The answer leads to a funny story from Bob Shayne.
The company's full name, which was a local joke not ever meant to be put out on the air, was Nasty Corporation. I think that idea came out of the fact that when the Universal TV VP told the CEO of all of Universal Studios about the series, the CEO, Lou Wasserman, replied, "It'll have to be anti-establishment to work." I was shocked that the head of the biggest TV studio in the United States would actually say such a thing, because who could be more establishment than him? I agreed with that sentiment. I knew it meant the bad guys had to be corporate, not street thugs, as you wouldn't want to put kids up against people who looked like they would beat them up or kill them. It took me years to realize even very rich and very powerful people come in different political stripes. At the time we made the show, and for many years before, Universal had been owned by MCA, which had previously been one of the top 1 or 2 talent agencies, along with William Morris, but gave up the agency business when the Justice Department sued them as a monopoly, and the Supreme Court ruled they had to give up either the studio or the agency. Every Universal show ended with a sign that said, Universal Television, an MCA company. So as a joke, I ordered the studio sign department to make up a sign that read, Universal Television, a division of NASCorp, to be placed at the end of the pilot. Phil loved the idea. It was only meant to be shown at the end of the pilot in the screenings for Universal and CBS. We never intended for it to go out on the air that way, but the studio legal department refused to let the sign department make the sign, or us to shoot it, giving the completely bullshit reason that it could undermine Universal's copyright on the show. So we didn't get to have it there at the screenings.
One highly memorable aspect of the show we can't skip over is the music. The music on the show was arranged by composer Paul Chihara. Chihara was born in 1938 in Seattle and is of Japanese descent. He spent 3 years of young childhood in a U.S. internment camp in Idaho during World War II, where he was separated from his father, who was sent to an actual prisoner of war camp in Texas. During these years, he learned to sing and performed to his literal captive audience and was influenced by popular Western big band music, as well as pre-war Japanese songs. After the war, he had formal music training, and at age 13 joined a USO troop and entertained American soldiers bound for the Korean War. After becoming a tenured professor of music at UCLA, as well as the composer-in-residence with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, director Roger Corman reached out to him to score his film Death Race 2000. This led to a life of repeated opportunities to score music for TV and film, and since he has provided music for Phil DeGuere's 1978 Doctor Strange, Manimal, China Beach, films The Morning After, Crossing Delancey, and over 50 additional TV movies and miniseries. The music of Whiz Kids was arrangements of classical music performed using an electronic synthesizer. The main theme is an arrangement of the first movement of the Piano Concerto No. 21 in C major, composed by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart in 1785. Mozart qualifies as one of the original Whiz Kids, writing the first of his mini piano concerti at age 11. Gioacchino Rossini's overture from The Barber of Seville is also heard repeatedly throughout the series. To highlight romantic interests of the characters, parts of the second movement of Mozart's Concerto 21 are played Andante. And that unmistakable classic, Tchaikovsky's love theme from Romeo and Juliet, shows up in at least one episode. These passages likely qualify as among the most recognizable pieces of classical music in history. The Whiz Kids opening music theme, based on Concerto No. 21, specifically the Allegro Maestoso, first movement, brings an old-world classic into the computer age, and with its exuberance, highlights the enthusiasm, curiosity, and wit of the main characters. I got in touch with Paul Chihara, and he told Forgotten TV where the idea for using classical music pieces came from.
The producer and creator of this show, Whiz Kids, was a serious music lover. Not so much of classical music as of the Grateful Dead and their living musical brethren of the 70s and 80s. But for this main title, Phil DeGuere was very specific. He wanted a passage he had heard in a concert of the Mozart Piano Concerto No. 21 in C major, the so-called Elvira Madigan Concerto, which was very popular at this time because of the very popular Swedish movie. He specifically wanted the opening melody of the first movement to accompany the three Whiz Kids investigating or searching for evidence on tiptoe as they prowled around scenes of crime. The musical image was perfect and left me plenty of inspiration for the other dramatic moments in the series. Even the famous love theme in the second movement found its place in my score. It was a fun show for me to work on, and I had a chance to meet the young cast and old crew in a most friendly and fulfilling way.
Elvira Madigan is a 1967 Swedish film based on the tragedy of the 19th century Danish tightrope dancer that went by that stage name. Because the film's soundtrack used Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21 in C, it is now sometimes referred to as the Elvira Madigan Concerto. As far as other uses of Concerto No. 21, you may recall the second movement playing as Carl Stromberg's underwater lair surfaced from the ocean in The Spy Who Loved Me. The music does seem to be a polarizing subject with some viewers. Some loved it, and others, well, Starlog magazine said,
Whiz Kids does boast the most annoying music heard on any current TV show, a never-ending video game-like score, sure to drive anyone who doesn't live Atari and breathe Coleco straight out of his/her and television.
There's no accounting for taste.
Whiz Kids, sponsored by Advanced Formula Crest with Fluorostat. Fighting cavities is the whole idea behind Crest. Whiz Kids will continue.
War Games, the motion picture, is now a video game for ColecoVision and the Atom computer. War Games, the motion picture, is now the video game where you must prevent the NORAD computer from starting a thermonuclear war. War Games, the motion picture, is now the video game where sector by sector you launch killer satellites, fire ABM missiles, blast enemy subs. But time is running out. War Games, the motion picture, is now the video game where only you can prevent the unthinkable. War Games, exclusively for ColecoVision and the Atom computer.
Spell meringue.
What's the symbol for oxygen? Next.
Next.
Nothing turns a child
Next.
off to learning faster than being forced into it.
Next.
Next.
Talking Whiz Kid turns children on to learning. It talks them through spelling, music, vocabulary, math, and lets kids know when they've learned their lessons well.
Yes, you are right.
Talking Whiz Kid, the computer-like learning machine that makes learning fun. Talking Whiz Kid from Video Technology.
Whiz Kids' real computer wizardry was handled behind the scenes by 3 technical advisors. David Gunn, 28 at the time, a microcomputer consultant, computer graphics mastermind Kurt Borg, who was 26, a specialist in mini and mainframe computers, and Jim Michaels, aged 22, who had a data processing background. These are the men that made Ralph work on a weekly basis. As Richie typed away on his keyboard, one of the 3 would be stationed at an Apple IIe or a Heathkit Zenith Z100 behind the wall of the upstairs bedroom set. The robot arm seen feeding Richie in the pilot was a Mini Mover 5 from Microbot Incorporated. Unlike the movie War Games, which used actor John Wood's voice for the Whopper, Ralph's speaking voice was real synthesized computer speech, as David Gunn told Enter Magazine in 1984.
A Votrax speech system gives Ralph his distinctive computerized voice. Up till now, most shows have settled for the voice of an actor they've tried to pass off as a computer, but Ralph really does speak.
As far as I can tell, it was likely an off-the-shelf Votrax Type and Talk using the SC01 speech synthesizer chip. The digitized images of the kids seen in the pilot were also really computer-generated and not a visual effect. The faces of the actors were photographed. Then these images were fed into the handy Apple IIe using an image synthesizer called Photocaster. The Photocaster camera took a still image, stored it on disk, then translated it into a high-contrast, digitized color image. This product was also available on the consumer market at the time. The system sold for $500, video camera an additional $250, and could serve as a primitive webcam, transmitting your image over the phone line to another Photocaster user. David Gunn said there was a real effort not to let Whiz Kids stray into science fiction.
There's a tendency in TV to make things far out so that the story won't get bogged down. We added a few more lights to Ralph than you'd find in comparable real-life computer systems, but otherwise, we're pretty careful.
David Gunn ended up leaving the show after 13 episodes, and Richard Edelman came on to replace him in the final 5 as the resident computer expert on the show. Richard, or Rick as he went by, had been training the CBS secretaries to use their new computers. Rick was particularly proud that he convinced one of the producers to purchase a Lisa, which would later become known as the Edsel of the computer industry. For more information on the components that made up Ralph as depicted on the show, I turned to the experts at the Vintage Computer Federation, who sourced props for shows like *Halt and Catch Fire* and *The Americans*. The layout of the components in Richie's room evolved over time. In most episodes, 2 to 3 silver panels with lights, knobs, and switches, as well as a black panel with red lights, visually depict Ralph. However, these were evidently not computers. They were probably leftover, purpose-built test or lab equipment control panels, acquired and obtained from a props department for just this kind of use. The center black panel with rows of red lights was probably purpose-built for the show. Other devices seen in episodes were an MSI 8080, MSI 8030, Tektronix Model 502 oscilloscope, and various EEPROM programmers, acoustic couplers, modems, and other peripherals. A Commodore keyboard is used in early episodes and the show opening, and this was replaced by a Zytex Corporation terminal keyboard in later episodes. Consultant Jim Michaels went on to be visual effects producer on Otherworld, Street Hawk, Airwolf, Knight Rider, Misfits of Science, and Probe, among other series. He expanded into producing on Midnight Caller and Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, and currently is co-executive producer of Supernatural on the CW, now in its 15th season. While the show frequently made use of real consumer-available devices, such as Farley's Gavilan laptop and Richie's TRS-80 Model 100, and a sharp-eyed viewer might recognize the apples in the school computer lab, the absence of Ralph components also prominently displaying brand names seemed conspicuously missing. Well, there is a reason for that. Recognizing advertising potential of being featured on the show, companies like Gavilan, Radio Shack, Apple, Heathkit, Microbot, and others loaned equipment to the show in exchange for the exposure and screen credit at the conclusion of episodes. Executive producer Phil DeGuere was a technology enthusiast, as already mentioned. An early adopter of microcomputers for work usages, such as script writing, he once spent 6 days of a writer's strike writing a database manager for recipes. His system for tracking daily production via computer software that he established for Simon & Simon was later adopted industry-wide. So, very early on, he contacted IBM, providing them with the pilot script, looking for the same deal he worked out with other technology companies. An IBM rep called Phil and told him they liked the script and would agree to lend out IBM equipment for use on the show, and give him permission for the IBM logo to be seen on screen, something they hadn't done since 1968's 2001: A Space Odyssey, on 2 conditions. The first, IBM insisted their equipment never be shown, used to access another computer system without authorization. The second was that their equipment not be shown doing something it was incapable of doing. However, they would only rent equipment to the production, not loan it out like other companies were doing. It turned out IBM, who had just fought the Justice Department in an antitrust lawsuit the prior year, were tightly managing its business practices to not even have the appearance of impropriety. As such, salesmen had very specific rules to follow. Reps had restrictive guidelines on what to say, and IBM emphatically did not loan equipment to anyone but non-profit organizations. However, Phil told PC Magazine in a 1983 interview, IBM PCs ended up making it into the show anyway. You just didn't recognize them.
We did use a lot of IBM stuff in making the show, but we either paid for it or borrowed it from the data processing department. We used this intense IBM terminal with a beautiful display, a big 4-color terminal. The EDP guys used a program called Roscoe to generate screens for us. That was the one that we were able to get close enough on, photograph sharply enough, to read it on a television set. I have to say I was really impressed with the quality of it in comparison to anything else. We actually ended up disguising the IBM. The story pits the kids against a bad corporation called NASCorp, which stands for Nasty Corporation, and they all had to have black computers. I got this idea because I saw a Tycom, a black computer from England. So, every NASCorp computer terminal is black, but the IBMs weren't black, so we had to go and wrap them all in black contact paper. In so doing, we obliterated the IBM logo, even though, in truth, I don't think we had them doing anything that was not technically feasible for those terminals. So IBM unwittingly became the bad computer.
DeGuere also had opinions on the ethics of hacking and implications for personal privacy.
I think I have a gut feeling for what is right and what is wrong when it comes to the issue of accessing other computer systems without authorization. For instance, I don't presume that there is a great deal of privacy in the world. I don't go around thinking that unauthorized people can't get my driving record or things like that. So the idea of somebody flipping through the DMV files looking for some information that might pertain to me doesn't bother me. I kind of assume it's happening anyway. I tend to sort of cherish paranoia theories. I believe that the existence of computer networks and vast databases suggests that some things that we've taken for granted shouldn't be taken for granted anymore, that we're on a shifting ground in society right now, and that it probably is a good thing that there are hackers who are cracking these systems, even though what any one hacker does may or may not be defensible. I don't think any hacker who gets into a computer system and crashes the files and renders it inoperable is doing something that should be commended. I'm not sure that a hacker who cracks a system because it's a challenge, and having done so and having learned more about the architecture of CPUs or operating systems or codes or stuff like that without doing anything harmful, is really a person to be scorned or frowned upon. I'm not sure about any of these things. I do know on a case-by-case basis how I feel.
But what about personal privacy? Phil had some interesting thoughts on that subject.
I don't presume privacy. Maybe I'm weird. First of all, I am convinced that this office is bugged, that the phone line is tapped, and that somebody is watching. I live in a house that's glass. I mean, it's literally 90% glass, and I do assume that there is very possibly somebody watching me walk around naked in my house. And if that's what they want to do, fine. It doesn't bother me. I know that they can't sneak up on me without me seeing them. This is a weird world we live in. If I wanted privacy, I'd go someplace that I knew was really private. As it is, I just assume that somebody's listening.
Just what were those hacker groups up to anyway? The first group that generated media attention, August 1983, was based in Milwaukee and called the 414s, after the local area code.
WISN-TV, Milwaukee. This is Channel 12 Action News.
The FBI this afternoon confirmed it is investigating members of a Milwaukee area computer club
for having successfully tapped in to the computer of the Nuclear Weapons Research Laboratory at Los Alamos, New Mexico.
Using techniques explained in Part 1, such as war dialing and using default passwords found in computer manuals, they dialed into places like the Los Alamos National Laboratory, albeit non-classified, non-critical systems, the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and the Security Pacific Bank, among some 60 systems altogether. They were eventually identified as 7 teenagers aged 15 to 22 using inexpensive home computers that met on local BBSs, where they learned how to access random computer systems well before War Games was released. They were described as meeting the FBI profile of computer hackers at the time:
young, male, intelligent, highly motivated, and energetic.
Sounds like a description of most teenage boys. What did these criminals do? Essentially, looked around and played games, which were found in most computer systems at the time. Sometimes they coded a backdoor so they could easily get back in using the password Joshua. Yes, right out of War Games. Often they couldn't resist leaving their tag 414 on the game scores they achieved. On some systems, they used the command set process /priv equals all to gain root privileges. It seems Gus Gorman typing override all security in Superman 3 may not have been that far-fetched. Playing games is how they think they were caught. After accidentally deleting some files that kept track of doctors' billing times, a total loss of about $1,500 during a hacking session on June 3rd, yes, the very day War Games was released, they made the FBI's radar, who later used a honeypot in the form of a Star Trek game planted in the file system. When they went back in to access this file, the 414s think the FBI was able to trace them back to their home phone lines. Timothy Winslow recalls pops and clicks, as well as random disconnects on his phone line. It turns out his next-door neighbor worked for the phone company and had installed the FBI wiretap on his line. After cooperating with the FBI agents that came knocking on his door one morning that summer, he found he was the third 414 member to be visited. They had already confiscated a computer from another member, but couldn't figure out how to turn it on, even after buying a book on computers. In 1985, 414 members Timothy Winslow, 18, and Gerald Wondra, 21, were finally charged with a crime resulting from computer hacking, even though, as Matt Laberto correctly pointed out in his defense of Whiz Kids, there were not yet specific laws regarding this. While the legal adults in the group faced charges the FBI came up with, such as making harassing telephone calls, 17-year-old Neil Patrick got out in front of the case and started his own media campaign. Appearing on all 3 TV networks, Donahue, the Sunday talking head shows, and that infamous cover of Newsweek. On September 26, 1983, 9 days before Whiz Kids premiered, he testified before Congress about computer hacking and the state of computer security, and cooperated with the FBI in exchange for immunity from prosecution. This wasn't the only group making the news. Another group called the Inner Circle, made up of 15, mostly teenagers from across the country, had been under surveillance by the FBI since 1982. The group associated on online bulletin boards, and members roamed GTE's Telenet, as well as the ARPANET, the predecessor to today's Internet. 1 week following the Whiz Kids premiere, FBI agents in Detroit, Rochester, Oklahoma City, Tucson, and Irvine, California, raided the homes of Inner Circle members, confiscating all computer equipment. In Irvine, at 6:15 a.m., FBI Special Agent James Donkles crawled through the upstairs window of 17-year-old Wayne Correia's bedroom, shouting,
"FBI, that computer is mine."
While computer equipment was confiscated, no arrests were made. 3 other Irvine boys were included in the raids. Wayne did an interview in the local Orange County Register, which ended up on the front page. The next day, when the boys returned to school, they found numerous media outlets waiting for them, and they decided to do an ad hoc press conference at the school that day. Looking like deer in the headlights, the boys insisted they really didn't do anything wrong and were just sending messages over a network. They had joined the Inner Circle at the invitation of someone called the Cracker, who had given them passwords to use GTE's Telenet system, a paid service. Photos of the boys' press conference ran in hundreds of newspapers that Friday. How much was War Games an influence on these kids? Wayne Correia tells Forgotten TV.
Oh, we were well underway with our fun for a year or more before War Games came out, for sure. GTE's Telenet was too much fun for kids with modems and endless disposable hours to explore, especially in the summer of '83. Those were some special times. War Games' popularity told us that we were definitely onto something, and we geeks, misfits, nerds, gays, etc. were about to flip the script and become the cool kids in pop culture. The last 30 years reinforces we were definitely the next generation's, Generation X, early adopters of this new culture.
After the press conference, Wayne was contacted by the Whiz Kids production to invite him to be a technical consultant on the show. But due to the trouble they were in with the feds, his mom wasn't having it. Just who was the cracker that invited the boys to join the inner circle? The cracker was 18-year-old Bill Landreth from San Diego, a legal adult. In May 1984, Bill Landreth became the first person I can find record of indicted with a crime related to computer hacking. With no specific laws to charge him with, he was indicted with 3 counts of wire fraud. In a plea agreement, he pled guilty to 1, and the other 2 were dropped. When he was evaluated by court order, he was found to have a 163 IQ and was sentenced to 3 years probation and ordered to attend college or perform 200 hours of community service, and reimbursed GTE for a grand total of $87 in unpaid telephone charges. However, the suspected leader and mastermind of the inner circle was known as the Wizard of ARPANET, 14-year-old Eric from Detroit. Some of the Wizard's alleged activities would range from pranks like getting a bunch of senior military personnel on a conference call for no reason and listening to the inevitable hilarity that ensued, to deleting emails from Coca-Cola executives and changing the names on email accounts. Being 14 years old, he was never charged with anything, but had his bedroom turned upside down and all his computer equipment confiscated. I don't want to make light of the activities of the real-life Whiz Kids. The sharper ones were at risk of being targeted for blackmail or recruitment by foreign state agencies due to their abilities, not unlike Episode 10, The Network. And though many of the activities they engaged in may have been benign, the intent of imitators may not have been. In 1986, Congress passed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which made it a crime to break into computer systems. So where did these real-life Whiz Kids end up? Timothy Winslow of the 414s, whose picture ended up being used in hacker memes, became a network engineer after his probation ended. He's still married to his high school sweetheart and participated in a documentary short film on the 414s in 2015. Neil Patrick, who was 17 and became the de facto face man for the 414s with his media blitz, also appeared in that documentary short. As an adult, he lost interest in computers, but found his niche in the world of marketing. He is now a marketing executive for L'Occitane, an exclusive French cosmetics brand. Eric, the 14-year-old alleged leader of the inner circle, known as the Wizard of the ARPANET, who went uncharged due to his young age, went back to school and enjoyed his brief celebrity. He studied computer science in college and, as an adult, became an upstanding family man and went legit in the computer field. He is now a published IT author and executive speaking to audiences at annual industry conferences. And Bill Landreth, the cracker, the first person successfully charged with crimes related to computer hacking, soon wrote a book on the experience called Out of the Inner Circle in 1985. He initially made a fairly decent income from this, but his life has been unstable ever since. One day, after writing an 8-page rambling essay about mankind that included talk of suicide, he got up from his computer and started walking the earth with nothing but his house key, a passport, and the clothes on his back. during his probation. He was arrested in Oregon and served 3 months jail time. He was last seen in San Diego in 2016, where writer Matt Novak interviewed him about his life. Struggling with mental illness, the man with the 163 IQ, who could easily pull down a 6-figure income in any of several computer-related fields, or made off with a fortune illegally for that matter, has lived in the area homeless for over 30 years. For even more on the 414s, The Inner Circle, and Neil Patrick, listen to the upcoming supplemental podcast on Patreon that will accompany this episode.
From Radio Shack, the TRS-80 Model 3. And at $200 off, it's a great value. Select from Radio Shack's huge program library. To aid your children's education, plan your personal and household budgets, or to entertain with fast-action games. You can even learn to write programs. The TRS-80 Model 3, on sale for $7.99, only at Radio Shack and Radio Shack Computer Centers, the computer experts.
Star Trek, the game. A game so challenging, you need this combat control panel to play it. Take command of the Starship Enterprise as you battle your way through unknown sectors. Blast Klingons. Raise your shields. Watch for space mines. Is this the most challenging game in the galaxy?
It's inhuman.
Star Trek from Sega.
Now it's time to hear from the man who made most of this podcast possible and facilitated the first Whiz Kids actor interview, which cascaded into several. Bob Shayne, the co-creator and original producer of the show. Well, a special treat today on this episode of Forgotten TV. He was a writer on shows like 8 is Enough, Knight Rider, and Simon & Simon, and a producer of 80s shows, Cover Up, and of course, Whiz Kids. I'd like to welcome to Forgotten TV, Mr. Bob Shayne.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us here on Forgotten TV, and of course, we're talking primarily about 1983's Whiz Kids. But before Whiz Kids, if you can just let us know a little bit about yourself and what you did before then.
Okay. Well, I started in television in the 1970s, writing sitcoms, and I had a partner then, Eric Cohn, who's a very funny guy who had just graduated USC. I was a few years older than him, and we landed actually 4 pilots at CBS. We sold 4 pilots to CBS before we had written more than 1 or 2 episodes, and produced the 4th pilot. That was the first one that was shot. And so we went into the business with writer, producer, creator credits, which is what you could sometimes try 20 years in the business to try to achieve. And then I sort of managed to work my way down from there. On subsequent shows I worked on, there were various reasons I couldn't get a producer credit, including on Simon & Simon. That was probably the most important series I worked on for my career. And we had a big to-do over my demand for producer credit when it was going to start, and the studio's refusal to give it to me because they had assigned 2 other people as producers on it, under Phil DeGuere, who was the executive producer and ran it. And I refused the story editor credit that they wanted to give me. So I said, just don't give me any credit, and just let me write as many as I can grind out. And they said, fine. And I actually wrote or did major rewrites on something like 8 of the first 13 or something like that. So, my background started in sitcoms, and then when Eric and I broke up shortly after, I switched to doing hour shows that I considered mystery comedies, whether they considered them to be that or not. The people who made them, that's what I've always thought it was I was writing. I always wanted to write Rockford Files, but I never got a chance there. It was in its last year or two when I started doing that kind of stuff. And I'm an enormous fan of Roy Huggins, who created it, and he's one of my idols. And I met him a couple of times. I had a couple of meetings with him, but I never got to work with him or on the show on Rockford.
Oh, but you did get to work on shows like Heart to Heart and Foul Play, I guess is what we're talking about, when circa...
Well, yeah, I actually developed the first 10 scripts for Heart to Heart. That was one of the many heartbreaking stories of my career. Tom Mankiewicz rewrote and directed the pilot. He was editing the pilot when I got hired as story editor, and the two of us supervised the first 10 scripts. I wrote 2 of them. Then he wasn't going to stay with the show, and somebody had to actually be showrunner, because this was an Aaron Spelling production, and Aaron and his partners had so many shows on the air that they needed somebody as the actual showrunner on each one, even though that term wasn't used at the time. And I recommended somebody just because I liked the show he had worked on. David Levinson was his name. And I got him hired for the job, and on his first day on the job, he fired me. So,
oh, no.
And so my story editor credit never appeared on the air on Heart to Heart, although I had supervised the first 10 scripts. But it did a lot for me. It sort of propelled my career after that.
And you worked on 8 is Enough.
Right. No, I was story editor on 8 is Enough, but I quit it after there was a writer's strike. No, there was an actor's strike while I was working on 8 is Enough, and they kept 6 or 7 writers on the payroll for 2 or 3 months during the actors' strike, and we had nothing to do, and it wasn't well enough organized to have us actually writing, which would have been wonderful. It was costing the company a fortune. Then the strike was over, we went back in business, and I had written a couple of scripts, and I got an offer. I needed to write a pilot that I had been trying to sell. I got a phone call from Aaron Spelling 2 years after I had pitched him this idea for a pilot, A Return of Sherlock Holmes, and he had gotten ABC after 2 years. He'd worn them down enough that they agreed to let us write the pilot, and I quit 8 is Enough in order to focus on that, because they needed it. After waiting 2 years to order it, they of course needed it in 3 or 4 weeks. So that's how both of those things happened. And then ABC hated the script of The Return of Sherlock Holmes and wouldn't even give me notes for a second draft. And I spent the next 7 years trying to sell that script. I'd gotten paid by ABC, but also under the Writers Guild rules, if you create a series and write the pilot, the rights to it revert back to you in 3 years. So that happened with The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and 7 years later I sold it to CBS, the pilot that ABC hated so much they wouldn't give me notes for the second draft. They said the first draft made no sense. I managed to sell it to CBS, and I produced it rather than Aaron Spelling produced it. I was the showrunner, and it came in first in its time slot. It had the highest rating that anything on CBS had in that time slot for a year. And they virtually never duplicated it since then, and really good reviews, and one was nominated by both the Writers Guild and the Mystery Writers of America as Best TV Movie or Miniseries of the Year. So that was sort of my revenge against ABC. In fact, ABC not only refused to give me notes on the pilot, they never would hire me again after that. And I never worked on ABC again.
Also, you worked on, you were involved in the story on an episode of Tales of the Gold Monkey, which I've already considered and talked to Tom Green, a writer-producer on that show, and one of the favorites, the episode Last Chance Louie.
Yeah, I actually was very excited about. There were 2 shows that started that season that were sort of TV ripoffs of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and one was the Gold Monkey, and the other one was, you tell me the title, the other one.
Bring 'em Back Alive.
Bring 'em Back Alive, that's right. I couldn't think of that. And I would have loved to write for both of them. In fact, a good friend of mine did the final draft of the pilot of Bring 'em Back Alive that got it ordered, Tom Sawyer, who I know you want to talk about later. And then he got fired off of it. And I would love to have worked on either of those. I guess at that moment I was available. I wasn't exclusive to Universal. So I pitched ideas to both of them. And in both cases, I got an order for a story, and then I got cut off, and somebody else wrote the teleplay. So from their point of view, I didn't do a good job, apparently. From my point of view, they were just schmucks. Tom Green and his partner, on a Friday, I had turned in the story, and they told me, we'll give you an go-ahead or not to write the teleplay on Monday. And I called him up Monday. I don't know if it was Tom or the other guy. I called him up Monday and said, what about, can I start writing the script now? And they said, oh, don't bother. We wrote it over the weekend. And so I'm glad that viewers liked it.
Well, those were some great shows. Let's kind of ease into getting to talk about Whiz Kids. Now, how did you get to start working with Mr. Phil DeGuere?
I was under contract to Universal off and on for about 8 years, and my kind of calling card script was a movie pilot. Again, I tended to write 2-hour pilots, so they tended to be both considered TV movies and what was called backdoor pilots, because they usually went through the movie department instead of the dramatic development department. And I wrote a spec movie or pilot, originally called Heart, Heart, and Heart. And later, when that suddenly became lifted and much improved by Robert Wagner when he changed the title of his upcoming show to Heart, I changed the title of that script to Wilder and Wilder. And it was my calling card for about 10 years. It never got shot, but it got me lots and lots of work. One of the people I gave it to was Phil DeGuere. And it was about a divorced husband and wife who jointly owned and ran a 2-person private detective agency in Beverly Hills. And we know that they should get back together as a couple, but they don't necessarily know that. And it was kind of revolutionary in its day, both because a divorced couple were the stars, and because they had a gay male secretary, which was way out there at the time, and like nothing that had ever been done on television. And so Phil read it, and he later told me that CBS, he was very close to the head of programming at CBS at that time, Kim LeMasters, and Kim suggested to Phil that he write a sort of a modern Sundance, sort of a modern Butch and Sundance, and Phil took my script that he had just read and Butch and Sundance as the two inspirations he was drawing on, and he came out with a pilot called Simon and Simon. And he told me, if this pilot sells, I want you to call me the next day because I want you to work on it. And I did, and there was another strike involved. We had to sit through a writer's strike again. But the minute the strike was over, he put me into script on a story I had actually sold twice to Magnum and got cut off twice at Magnum, and I pitched the same story to Phil, and he put me in the script, and it was the other time that I was nominated, this time for Best TV Episode of the Year by the Mystery Writers of America, and that was my first Simon and Simon, and that led to being there, being part of that crew. Eventually, a year and a half or so later, to creating Whiz Kids.
Yeah, Simon and Simon had a rough season, the first season, and then after they moved it to Thursday nights and gave it a second chance, jazzed up the theme song, it became a hit for CBS.
Yeah, we had shot 13 shows, and due to a writer's strike, the whole season was delayed, and nobody was watching it. And CBS was thinking of moving it at some other time slot, and Magnum had become the biggest hit in the world. Like it had only started a year before, and it was on Thursdays at 9 at that point. And also there had been a kind of a controversy in the industry that ABC had hired a psychic to tell them how to schedule their fall schedule. So that was kind of embarrassing to ABC that word got out about that. Well, it so happened that I had a friend, a former girlfriend, who was the secretary to the ABC Psychic, so-called ABC Psychic, and I asked Phil if he would ask the then head of programming of CBS if he'd like the ABC Psychic to predict what time slot they should move Simon and Simon to. And the guy at CBS said, well, sure, don't tell anyone, but sure. And I told my ex-girlfriend to please ask her boss and to plant the idea in her boss's head of moving Magnum to 8 o'clock and following it with Simon and Simon, which was the most obvious thing to do. I'm sure they would have thought of it without any help from a psychic.
Sure.
She came back with that suggestion. I gave it to Phil. Phil gave it to CBS, and they did it. And thank goodness it worked, because the people who liked Magnum stayed tuned for Simon and Simon, and it went from nobody watching to being a top 10 show in no time. So that's that story. And then in the fall, I had also proposed and eventually wrote a 2-hour, 2-part story that started out on Magnum and then went over to Simon and Simon when it was following Magnum, and that really hooked people, and they started watching Simon and Simon as much or even more than Magnum. Many weeks we had slightly higher ratings than Magnum. Ironically, though, the show against us became one of the greatest all-time television series, and that was Cheers. Mm-hmm. And while we were doing tremendous ratings in the heartland, Cheers was attracting the elites on the coasts, and was a brilliant show. And eventually both our show and Cheers were in the top 10 every week.
Oh, Thursday night was a fantastic night for TV in that era.
Yeah.
This was an early example of crossovers. Now, networks had done that to an extent, but mostly with shows that spun off of each other. The Happy Days spinoffs did a lot of those crossovers, but and of course you can count something like the Charlie's Angels Were on the Love Boat type of thing. But as far as like a dramatic or an action adventure 1-hour series, when Simon and Simon crossed over with Magnum PI, that's a fairly early example of that happening.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that had ever happened when I did it, as far as I remember. But you probably had. But it was a little different because the people who ran the two shows, Phil DeGuere, who ran Simon and Simon, and Don Belisario, who ran Magnum, weren't exactly best buddies. They were competitors, and they were sort of frenemies. And it wasn't easy to get the two of them to work together, and frankly, they rewrote each other's versions of the scripts of the crossover. You know, Phil didn't like my version, and Don didn't like his version. But and what ended up being shot, I think, wasn't nearly as good as the early drafts had been. But and yet, it still worked, and it saved Simon and Simon despite all the problems.
Totally. I mean, Simon and Simon after that was getting a 30 share. In the second season, so it was somewhere around 1981 when Simon and Simon first went to air late that year, that Phil had another idea for another TV show.
No, he didn't.
Well, tell us tell us the story of how Whiz Kids came to be.
Okay, I was still fighting for this producer role and Simon and Simon, and one of the producers was moved off of it. She really wasn't right for it, and she did very well on other shows at Universal. And so there was theoretically, at least in my mind, there was a job opening. And I went back to Phil and I said, okay, now it's time to make me the missing producer on the series. And Phil went to the other producer, who's producer under him as executive producer, who is Richard Chapman, and said, okay, I'm going to bring Bob in as producer now, along with you. And according to Phil, because I only know what Phil told me, and Richard may say that this is bullshit, but according to Phil, Richard's response was, you bring him on as producer and I quit. So once again, I was stymied at getting my second producer credit, the first one having been the first thing I ever shot years ago. some point after that, I thought, all right, I'll just invent another show. And that became Whiz Kids. And the reason I created that particular show was this. It was a very important commercial reason. 60 Minutes was usually the number one show of the week in the ratings. It was always in the top 10. And this was back in like the early 80s. It had already been on the air 10 or 20 years at this point. And opposite 60 Minutes, there was a show produced by Universal on NBC called Voyagers, and there was a show produced by Universal on ABC, also against 60 Minutes. I forget what it was. And they were both doing very badly in the ratings, and they were both expensive shows, and we knew that they were going to both be canceled, and that some other new show would go into that time slot, one on NBC and another one on ABC the following fall. And there was a good chance that one or both of those would be produced by Universal, because Universal had a sweetheart deal with NBC. They ended up buying each other. And they had a good relationship with ABC, and they produced more, at that point, more primetime scripted series than any other studio. And a few years earlier, there had been a series on ABC in that time slot called The Hardy Boys, and alternating with the series called Nancy Drew. And they got canceled because ABC was not happy with their ratings. But in the 3 or so years after that happened, none of the shows that replaced Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew had ratings as high as Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew had. So at this point, ABC was regretting ever having canceled those shows. And I always loved those books all my life. Nancy Drew more than Hardy Boys. And in fact, I wrote one of the last Hardy Boys, although it got canceled, didn't get shot. So I went to the president of Universal TV, who happened to be a friend of mine, Robert Harris. We had both come over there from writing and producing the local Los Angeles version of the AM show, which preceded what then became Good Morning America. I brought Phil with me because Phil was the big showrunner, and I was pretty close to him. And we said to Robert, let's do the Hardy Boys right. Not meaning literally the Hardy Boys, do something like the Hardy Boys, but do it right, because I thought Glenn Larson had done it all wrong. I thought most of what Glenn Larson did had been done wrong. And Phil said, oh yeah, and we'll give them a computer. And Robert said, fine, go write a pilot. And that was the beginning of Whiz Kids. And the studio actually paid for the pilot script, which normally studios don't do. Normally you need a network for that. But the studio was so confident that they could sell it and that they could put it into ABC or NBC Sunday at 7 that they said, go ahead and write the script without worrying about getting a network to pay for the script. Then, once the script was written, the bad news was somebody at Universal told somebody at CBS that this script existed, and CBS asked to read it. And Kerry McCluggage, who was the second in command at Universal under Robert Harris, told me and Phil that he was going to give the script to CBS. And I pleaded with him not to give it to CBS because there was no place on the schedule where it made sense to put in a show starring 13, 14-year-olds. It made sense opposite 60 Minutes because all of the intelligent adults in America and a few intelligent teenagers and a couple of intelligent children were watching 60 Minutes, and everybody else in America needed something to watch. And certainly all the rest of the kids and teens in America were not 60 Minutes viewers and would gravitate to Whiz Kids. But there was no slot on another network opposite 60 Minutes because CBS had 60 Minutes in that slot. And I knew the minute CBS got interested that my vision of what this show should be was dead. And frankly, I was very unhappy with almost everything that happened after that point.
That was a problematic time slot for a lot of shows that went up against 60 Minutes. I mean, you mentioned Voyagers.
Well, finally they gave up. Finally, for 20, 30 years, there's only been news magazines that cost, 1/20th to produce what a scripted show costs.
They had done the Disney, Wonderful World of Disney was in that time slot.
Right.
Ripley's Believe It or Not. And that time slot was problematic for another reason, because often network football games would run late, and it would cut into the airtime of whatever was airing at 7 p.m. So as a young viewer, that became frustrating for me. A lot of times they joined the show in progress. So you ended up missing the first 20, 25, half an hour of Voyagers or whatever the show was that you were tuning in for.
Right. But I mean, while that's true, it wasn't as important as the demographics of that hour of television, which was perfect for Whiz Kids.
Well, it makes total sense. Yeah, Galactica 1980 was also in that time slot. So there was a lot of shows, and I watched shows in that time slot. I well remember not being one of the 60 Minutes viewers. So I would have been the target audience.
You were a kid, and most kids were not interested in that at all.
Okay, so the pilot then gets given to CBS, the script. And
against my fervent pleas.
Right. And they expressed interest in the show?
Yes, they a few weeks later, they said, we want to make this. But shooting the pilot was a big milestone in my life. But even before shooting it, casting it was quite an experience, because I was insisting that we use real teenagers. And in retrospect, that may have been a mistake, because you have lots of extra problems when you cast children under 16 who are still in school. We were lucky that Matt Laberto had graduated high school or had a GED and was 16 or more, so that he wasn't covered by these special work rules for children, and he could work longer hours. But the other three lead kids were all under 16 and still in school, and we had to abide by these very strict California work rules for children, and I think they can only work 4 hours a day, I believe, and they have to be in school so many hours a day. And that greatly delayed the shooting of the pilot, the number of days it took to shoot the pilot. You said it was a $2 million production. Well, it may have been a $2 million production when we started shooting it, but it was probably a $4 million production by the time we finished. It was at least a week over schedule.
Well, we had talked about, so you talked about the casting. What other actors may have been considered for some of those roles?
There were two people considered for Richie, and I don't remember the other actor's name. He was younger and nerdier, and he would have been good. And it was just really a flip of the coin. And we went with Matt, possibly because he had the GED, and he was not considered a minor for working purposes. And he was great. He was very solid. The other three were people with very little background as actors, but they were just all kind of delightful kids who could read the lines believably. But there was one actor that I desperately wanted to audition, because I had met him previously when I worked on 8 Is Enough. While I was a story editor on 8 Is Enough, they sent me to the airport to pick up a kid they had hired, a teenager they had hired, to play a new continuing role in the show, to toughen up the show, because it had a very kind of upper middle class white collar feeling to the family, and they wanted to bring on a teenager who was more blue collar. And they hired this actor from New York, and he flew out, and I was delegated, I don't know why, to pick him up from the airport. And I did. And he seemed like a tough kid in the car. He was very nice, but he just had this aura about him of blue-collarness that they wanted on 8 Is Enough. And I was very, very impressed with him on the trip from the airport to the studio. And his name stuck in my head. And so when we were casting Whiz Kids, I looked him up there used to be a big book of all the actors who are in SAG. And I looked him up in the children's part of the book. And there was a picture of him. He's a very handsome kid. But for some reason that I didn't understand, he had chosen, or his parents or his agent had chosen a picture to be put in this book in which he had long hair down to his shoulders. And this was like 10, 15 years after the hippie era. I don't know why he made that choice. But I showed the picture to Phil DeGuere, who was my boss, and said, this kid should play Ham, and I'd like to get him in here for an audition. And he looked at the kid with all the hair down to his shoulders, and he said, not unless Ham is a girl. And I said, no, really, we got to bring him in. And Phil absolutely would not see this kid. And so we never had a shot at hiring him to be Ham, which he would have been, which is, the tall secondary lead guy. And a year or two later, he got hired to be the Karate Kid. And his name was Ralph Macchio. And he became a sensation, like the biggest young male actor in the country for years after that. And could very well have made the difference in, making Whiz Kids a hit show that stayed on the air a few years. And if so, he probably wouldn't have had a chance to do the Karate Kid.
That's right, because they were filming the Karate Kid during the fall season of Whiz Kids.
Right.
And
it was that close. I didn't realize it was that close.
I know it overlapped with at least part of the season filming. But he had already filmed The Outsiders, but it had not been released, so you wouldn't have seen it.
Right.
So he was about to hit it in the big screen.
Yeah, right.
And
exactly.
So things might have turned out a little bit different if he had been unavailable for the Karate Kid.
Yeah, right. For them and for us.
Yeah. So what about any of the other actors? Did anyone else stand out to you as...
Well, I liked them all. I mean, they were, I thought, and I have their names here because I'm terrible at names. I thought Todd Porter was good as Ham, and Jeffrey Jaquette as Jeremy. And I adored Andrea Elson. And she was just charming and delightful in the auditions, and I thought just perfect for the role as Alice.
Now, in the pilot, we have a character named Gallagher. And he turned out to... We could talk about him for a minute.
Michael Horton played Gallagher. And I thought Michael Horton was just perfect. He played a young reporter on a local newspaper. And he was sort of meant as a transitional character in between the kids and the grown-ups in the show. Because he was young and adorable, like the kids, but he was in his 20s. And he tended to be more sympathetic to the kids' point of view than other older grown-ups were. That was the point of the character, and I thought Michael did a wonderful job playing it. Unfortunately for him, and as far as I'm concerned for me, the then head of programming of CBS, whose name escapes me, decided that Michael Horton looked too much like the teenagers, and they should replace him with somebody who looked like an actual grown-up adult. And I think that this is the kind of thing that happens to a lot of shows, that you get a pilot order and then somebody with some authority at the network wants to assert their authority and gives you an order that is really bad. And this is exactly that situation as far as I'm concerned. And Phil should have said no. He should have argued. But he wanted to stay in the good graces of this guy. I wish I could remember his name. And so he agreed to replace that character. And
might that have been Harvey Shepard?
Harvey Shepard, that's who it was.
Okay.
Harvey did a couple of really bad things to me in my life, not intentionally. I mean, he never heard of me probably, but he made a couple of really bad choices that were bad for me. The other one was not going to series with the return of Sherlock Holmes, or even allowing a second movie to be made. But so in this case, Phil agreed to replace Michael Horton. And then he was deluged with calls from agents pitching actors. And he fell in love with the idea of Max Gail because Max had just come off of Barney Miller. And Barney Miller was not all that popular, but a very chic show that, again, the elites on the coasts loved Barney Miller. I loved Barney Miller, although it was not an enormous hit in the rest of the country. And so Max Gail was a little bit of a name, at least in Phil's mind. And that was a good reason to hire him as far as Phil was concerned. Well, it turned out to be a real pain in the ass from my point of view, because Max, who had played a sweet, not too bright character on Barney Miller, was determined to play himself on Whiz Kids. And he had long hair, sometimes in a ponytail. He had very new left kind of hippie kind of ideas, and he wanted to inculcate those traits into his character on Whiz Kids, and I didn't feel that they belonged anywhere near Whiz Kids. So I was never happy with that, and that was a running argument from week to week. He wouldn't cut his hair, and he wanted to save the planet when it had nothing to do with what we were doing. I'm all for saving the planet, but not necessarily during my mystery comedy. And I've even Max and I have talked about this since then. He was possibly surprised. I told him 20 years later that I didn't really ever want him in the show. But I think he understood where I was coming from. And I love him. I would certainly cast him in the appropriate role, but I didn't feel that was the appropriate casting.
Well, do you recall any negative feedback regarding the pilot? This was shown from newspaper articles I'm reading. They all say June. It was shown to the press, and there was a press announcement, and the CBS president liked it himself, or so he said to everyone. But it got a lot of negative articles written about it. And
yeah, I'm not aware of that either. I don't know how much I was aware of it at the time. But they were negative. Why?
There was pushback on all of the activities that the kids engaged in. And the early script...
You mean because they did things that were dangerous and or broke the law?
Go figure. Digging up graves.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. I always worry about that. I actually am developing a similar kind of show right now, and I think about that all the time. But that's where the fun is. If you're going to do an adventure for teenagers, you're not going to give them guns or put them into life and death situations, but you're going to do as close to that as you can. You could say the same thing about probably any great piece of children's literature, let alone television show.
I think it got an unfair treatment because they were overly critical of all of the aspects presented in the show. I mean, one newspaper critic called it appalling instead of appealing, and then she went to go on to list all the naughty things they did. Well, Ham stole his brother's car, and they dug up a grave that was empty, and they snuck into a hospital, and just this laundry list of all of these things.
Yeah. Well, I knew the grave was empty when I told them to dig it up. I would never have had them dig up a grave and have a body in it, although someone else might have done that, but I never would have done that. I really like digging up graves, apparently. They also dig up two graves in The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and they dig up a grave in one of the episodes of this no-show that I'm developing. So I guess I'm big on that.
Well, we know that
I don't know why.
There were a couple of changes then that were made from or maybe it's a result of some of the editing from the pilot that was shown at the press release to when it went to air. There was a couple of things deleted, and there was at least one line added to where Gallagher said, I gave the kids my password, to emphasize that they had permission to get onto the computer system for the Gazette. There was a scene where, at least it was written, that where they accessed the school computer without authorization, and that just completely, I didn't notice that in the final aired pilot.
Yeah, well, I would guess that was just a matter of time, that we had to take those 2 or 3 minutes out of it that I mentioned before. And as to the added line, I noticed that when I ran the pilot the other day, I noticed that was, it felt like it was an added line.
It was a dub, totally.
I don't know why it was put in, but I don't believe it had anything to do with censorship. I could be wrong, but I doubt it.
So were you aware of all of the things going on in the news at the time, right around, especially right around the premiere of the show in late August and September, with these real-life, quote-unquote, whiz kids that were hitting the news because they were engaging in activities clearly inspired by war games, where they were accessing computer systems and being run afoul of the FBI?
Yeah, sure. There were news stories like that. I don't remember our being, worried about them or associating very closely with them. But the term "Whiz Kids" became the title of the show, and it was Phil's idea in the meeting with Robert Harris. He said, "We'll call it Whiz Kids." And it came out of the media because various media publications were calling the people who were inventing the internet and developing new computer things. They were being called whiz kids by the press.
It was quite popular in 40s and 50s term as well.
Yeah, but probably not applied to the same.
No, exactly.
Thing, because there weren't any computers except for the IBM mainframe, which was maybe not till the 50s.
The first usage, actually, that I find specifically referring to computers is, and I don't know if either one of you were aware of the Radio Shack comic books, where they called the
I wasn't.
Okay, they had the
Phil might have been. Phil was totally smitten by computers. The character Richie almost was Phil DeGuere.
It sounded like that.
Phil was totally in love with computers. I think that from my point of view, probably you don't agree because you were a fan of the show, but from my point of view, there was much too much emphasis on computers.
It was almost fetishized. How the plugging in and the opening and turning on and the logging on and it was endlessly shown. And I think that's one of the things that whenever entertainment does that, it immediately dates the show to the era that it's in. And especially something that's already from decades ago. So it ends up limits possibly future interest in that because of the issue of it being, dated. But from articles that I've read with interviews with Phil, he does seem to come across as somebody that was an enthusiast of
very much
what they were calling microcomputers.
He computerized all of Universal Pictures. They in my mind it was Texas Instruments, although I saw that they did get a credit in the show. But I think it was Texas Instruments that came in and sent a whole bunch of people down there and installed computers all over the place.
There were at least a dozen.
And we're teaching. Well, by the way, I should mention that I had they put a computer in my office and they sent somebody to teach me how to use it, and I could not possibly learn how to use it. And eventually the guy said to me, "Oh, I need to teach you conceptually." I didn't even know what that meant. But I do, now I understand. I could learn if I knew why I was doing something, but I couldn't learn just from rote. In any case, I never used that computer, and I wrote the pilot script of Whiz Kids, which Phil then rewrote, on a standard-sized manual typewriter. It wasn't even an electric typewriter. And it was another 10 years until I got a computer and started writing on it. I remember one thing, though. We always had trouble getting the computers and the TVs to run at the same speed. I don't really have the vocabulary for this, but film.
Right.
No, not TVs.
Yes.
Film. Film goes at 24 frames a second, and a computer runs at 30. The equivalent of 30 frames a second, right?
Right.
So there was always a problem getting them so you could see what was on the television on the computer. And we were fighting that all the time. Apparently, that's been solved in some simple way since then, but it was a problem for us.
Definitely the technical consultants did their work on that show, making all of those things work. I know David Gunn was one of the, was credited.
David, yes.
Yeah, being
that's
one of the
guy. I
main,
remember him.
Main technical people. And
right.
I found an article that described how they used different software to make the speech synthesis and made the commands come up on the screen. So because all of that was, hard to do when you're trying to film the facial reactions and the reflection of the monitor and all of that kind of thing.
This is like the dark ages of computers. This is prehistoric days. So these things were really tricky, and nobody knew how to do these things, except these 5 people who we flew in from all over the world to help.
I mean, very few people would have even known what a modem was, and here you are seeing that every week.
Lots of time was spent waiting for to get the computer to work the way it's supposed to when you shoot it, when you film it.
They definitely did great work on all of the equipment, or making it at least appear that it was working together.
Right, absolutely.
Did you want to talk about any specific episodes, in particular ones that you wrote or had a hand in the writing of them?
Yeah, sure. I made a list yesterday.
Excellent.
Here it is. So the pilot became Programmed for Murder.
Mm-hmm.
And then according to IMDb, the next one that aired was 2 weeks later. I don't know why there's a week missing. And that was written by Tom Sawyer. And you wondered if that was a real person.
I did. I found out.
He is a real person, but he wasn't born Tom Sawyer. Right. He was born Tom Sawyer. And I'm not even sure how to spell it. And he was a cartoonist, I think quite a successful cartoonist living in Westport, Connecticut, and he moved to L.A. and became a TV writer. And since everybody always kiddingly called him Tom Sawyer, he changed his name to Tom Sawyer when he moved to L.A. Just a few years before Whiz Kids. And we hired him on as story editor, but he just didn't get along with Phil. Phil was starting to get a little crazy around the time that we started Whiz Kids, and he and Tom just didn't hit it off, and Tom didn't last too long there.
He worked on a lot of things I watched, I can tell you that. I mean, he had an episode of Wonder Woman and BJ and the Bear.
Oh, he's a great writer.
Yeah.
I always thought he was a terrific writer. He was, for many years, on Murder, She Wrote,
mm-hmm.
and wrote all my favorite Murder, She Wrote. He wrote tons of them.
Yeah, he has a book he just came out with 2 years ago where he published his biography, The Adventures of the Real Tom Sawyer.
Right, he has 2 or 3 books out. I didn't know about that one. And we used to be neighbors in Malibu. I met him through my agent at William Morris, who thought we would like each other, and by accident we ended up being neighbors for a couple of years. It says number 4 is Candidate for Murder, mm-hmm. which I think was written by me. And I remember that's the one with the freeways where somebody's kidnapped, and
yes.
the kids get the idea, I guess Richie gets the idea. There are these signs, I don't know if every city has these days, but there are signs over the freeways in Los Angeles every now and then that were lit up in lights, long before the days of LED. You could spell out words in lights on these signs, and they were put there to tell you, like, there's a traffic jam ahead, avoid the lane so-and-so. Mm-hmm. And they had just been recently installed when we were doing Whiz Kids. And I thought, what if you could use one of those signs to alert someone to avoid a murder or that someone was kidnapped? And so I wrote that into this script when it was totally fiction. There was no way you could possibly do such a thing with these signs. And the Universal Art Department prop department built a miniature of one of these freeway signs so that we could change the flashing lights. So that was probably done with CGI or whatever it was before CGI, and not real. And so we could change the message on the signs to whatever we wanted it to be. And that was a miniature that was used. Like 20 years later, they actually started doing it. And they actually, these days, if there's a missing child, there'll be a message on these signs.
Yeah, virtually every major city now has those. And that, I mean, in this era, though, certainly that was, I had never seen such a thing. That was probably my first, the first time I ever saw it was on the show.
Right. So, that was a lot of fun for me, and I enjoyed that episode.
Now people routinely hack them and tell us to watch out for zombies.
I bet. I'm sure.
Now, early on, also, we had the Simon and Simon crossover with Whiz Kids.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I don't remember that story.
Well, it was.
Which one is that?
It aired the night after the episode 3, and it wasn't a continuation of a story or anything, but we did introduce Jameson Parker as a character on Whiz Kids. And so we had A.J. Simon appear on Whiz Kids and showed a little bit of interest with Richie's mom. They had
coming back.
There was an encapsulated story, but the next night on Simon and Simon, the Whiz Kids helped Rick and AJ on their episode "Fly the Alibi Skies." And I know that you're not credited for any of the writing on either of these episodes, but I was just going to point that out, that this was another example of a TV crossover where there's your cross-pollination of shows where one show helps another.
Right.
And
who wrote the Whiz Kids show with that had Jameson Parker on it?
That was James Crocker.
Right.
And he did 5 episodes.
So was that Deadly Access?
That was, yes, Deadly Access.
Right. Mm-hmm. I see. Right. Okay. Yeah, he was story editor on Simon and Simon, and then he left Simon and Simon. He wanted to be a movie writer or something, and then when I left Whiz Kids, he replaced me as producer on Whiz Kids.
Well, I know he worked on 2 revivals of The Twilight Zone, the 1985 as well as the 2002. So that was Phil. Phil DeGuere did the 1985 revival of the Twilight Zone. So he would have
Jim was working with him again there.
Yeah.
And then in number 7, The Return of the Big Rocker, I feel like I wrote it, but it says that Paul Magistretti wrote it. So I did a major rewrite on it, I remember. And I also wrote 3 or 4 songs that were performed during it. And that was great fun for me. It also got me into ASCAP, and I've got royalties on those. And also I had some songs in other shows. And it's great to get these checks for $2 or $3 sometimes on the songs that were in these shows.
Yeah, that made use of actual hit songs from prior to that era. I mean, there was, of course, when the advertisement came on TV, it was all these songs we'd never heard of, which had to have been ones that you wrote and the actor performed or the singer performed. And one was integral in the plot of them playing it back multiple times on the computer.
Which one?
And wasn't one of them Great Balls of Fire?
Oh, yeah. And the guy who played it was a former evangelist who had become an actor named Marjo. Very interesting guy.
Marjo Gortner, yes.
Yeah.
And he was in a lot of cult films that probably cross over with a lot of our listeners. Pray for the Wildcats TV movie. And that's an infamous William Shatner and Andy Griffith TV movie. He was in Food of the Gods and a couple of really B or C list sci-fi films.
Yeah, I thought he was very talented. He played the piano and he sang. He did all those things in the show that none of that is dubbed. It's all him.
Yeah, you could tell it was being performed.
Yeah, I really liked him too. And the next one I have here, number 8. Number 8 is The Wrong Mr. Right. And this was there was a story behind getting this script done that was more scary than any TV show. We hired a guy, a writer named Arthur Weingarten, who had some very serious credits, and he was in the middle of trying to set up a series based on the French Inspector Maigret books, and he was setting this up in England, and he was flying back and forth between England and America when he got this assignment. I guess he pitched the story, he turned in the story, and we put him in the script, and then he apparently never wrote the script. But he kept telling us, well, I got it almost done. I'll have it in 2 days, and then I'll have it in another day. I'll have it in 3 days. And then he started telling us, I sent it to the Xerox store. It's sitting at the Xerox store waiting for you. And he would tell us where the Xerox store was. I would go to the Xerox store, and they wouldn't know what I was talking about. And I'd get him on the phone in England, and he'd say, no, it wasn't that Xerox store. It was the other Xerox store. And we spent at least a couple of weeks trying to track down the script that I'm convinced he never wrote. And finally we gave up on that and hired another writer to write it, and I did a big, heavy rewrite on it. But that was one of the most frustrating experiences working with any of the outside writers. But I want to tell you the story about the next one, Red Star Rising,
yes,
episode
tell us
number
about
9.
that one. That one's a really cool episode.
I had a couple of friends who I sort of mentored for a week or two, and then they were established writers, named Andy Gradot and Steve Kreinberg. I've been close to Andy all these years. I know Steve only through Andy. And they were young writers who had gotten, I believe their first job was on Archie Bunker's Place, which was the spin-off of All in the Family. And which was the producer of which was Joe Gannon, who became I brought over as a producer on Whiz Kids after Archie Bunker's Place ended. And I loved Andy and Steve's writing. I had read a couple of spec scripts of theirs, and they primarily were sitcom writers. But I got them this assignment, and they brought in a story I absolutely loved about Ham's family getting a new dog, and this dog would go berserk every night at the same time, like 2:33 a.m. or so. The dog would start howling and barking and would bust through a window or whatever it took to get out of the house and run away every night at the same time, and they didn't know why. And at the same time, we the audience is learning that there is a man who lives down the street from them with a big satellite dish. This is when people had, occasionally a rich person will have a big giant satellite dish in their yard. Mm-hmm. And he was using his satellite dish to send secret information stolen from a high-tech lab that his girlfriend worked at. And whenever he broadcast on the satellite dish in the middle of the night, it made all the dogs in the neighborhood go crazy, and this one dog in particular would run away every night. So I loved this story, and they wrote a script, and it was a delightful script. Oh, and meanwhile, Richie had troubles with Ralph every time the satellite dish was broadcasting, and so Ralph reacted to it as well as the dogs. When the show was set up at CBS, and it was time to get serious about prepping the scripts to shoot. I don't think it was CBS. I think it was Dick Lindheim, who was an exec at Universal on the show, said, you know what, this script is too aimed at kids. We need to make it more adult-friendly, and the solution is to get rid of the dog. And so we were banned from having the dog in the story, and the dog was the center of the story. So Joe Gannon took over the script and wrote a new script that had the spies and the satellite dish and Ralph, but no dogs. And I've been angry ever since. Dick Lindheim, although he's a lovely man, I also like him a lot, always wanted to see this done right. And in this new series that I'm developing now that is also has kids at the center of it and is a mystery, I took the story that Andy and Steve wrote and broke it down to look at the elements and wrote a new story based on it and a new script based on that I hope to get produced in this new series that I'm working on. And it's all about the dog. It has nothing that Joe added. So I hope someday to make that happen.
This episode also had some crossover with, or some cross-promotion, I should say. I noticed there was a full-size E.T. doll that was featured in one scene. And
I noticed that because I watched this a few months ago. Yes, I wondered about that myself.
Been
I don't know why they did it. I don't think that Steven Spielberg needed the help. After that episode, it looks like there's a lot of Jim Crocker, so that must have been around when I left.
And I noticed with this episode, Red Star Rising, this was the first time the show dropped into the single-digit ratings, whereas previously we were getting 12.4 and 11.1, and it was not terrible. I mean, it was getting 23s and 21 shares, but the audience on Wednesday night seemed to stop tuning in.
Yeah, well, I don't know what was up against it, or if that changed. I don't know.
It did have some good competition. Real People was one of the shows that it was up against.
That was an interesting show. That may have been the first unscripted, or what do you call that? The first reality show.
Reality or like.
And then you mentioned something by Glenn Larson.
The Fall Guy was huge.
Yeah, Fall Guy was a big show and a really dumb show. So it must have really drawn, all of those people who otherwise might have been watching with their kids, Whiz Kids.
Of course, this was Red Star Rising was the last Wednesday night show, and after that they moved it with the new year to Saturdays. And I don't know if
and Saturday had been a really good night of the week in the 70s. All in the Family and Mary Tyler Moore and MASH were all on Saturday night in the 70s, and it was the number one night of the week.
And the Love
despite
Boat.
Despite the fact that so many people go out on Saturday night. But now it's the worst night of the week for television. And, perhaps this 1983, maybe this was the beginning of Saturday night falling into disrepute.
Yeah, but one of the problems they had with it on Saturday was it didn't really fit in any kind of a programming block for CBS. It was a 8 o'clock show or 7 o'clock Central here in the Central time zone.
Yeah.
And then they would air a completely change of tone Saturday night movie. Next, Body Heat, or Sharky's Machine, or something with this adult. We've rerun, a rerun CBS Saturday night movie with a complete, not at all the same audience. Now the grown-ups will be able to enjoy the movie. And so it didn't really feel like that was a good home for it on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, I didn't think there was any good home for it on CBS, but certainly being followed by a grown-up movie is the worst possible combination.
And it was up against T.J. Hooker and Different Strokes and Silver Spoons.
Different Strokes and Silver Spoons were big hits. T.J. Hooker was a pretty big hit, too. So, I mean, it sounds to me like CBS was giving up on it when they moved it to Saturdays. They didn't expect it to succeed. They just had all these shows, they were burning them off, it sounds like to me.
So somewhere around this time, you ended up leaving the show.
Yes. I left. The show never ran very smoothly. And Phil was getting harder and harder to work with, and we were having problems with who was going to do what. And Jack Laird, who was an old-time writer-producer who had done Night Gallery, was assigned by Universal to help us. We were getting behind schedule, so they gave him the script to write, and we couldn't use a word of the script he wrote, and then we had to rewrite it instantly. And things were getting kind of bad. And Phil, he was getting harder and harder to deal with. And one day he came in and he fired Jack Laird and Joe Gannon and demoted me. And I said, no, you're not demoting me, I quit. And that was the end of his whole staff. And that's when he got Jim Crocker to come in. And I guess in time they got things somewhat under control.
So I don't know if you have any kind of input then on the episodes after you left. As I think we were talking.
I didn't, except that I did a rewrite on one as the show was ending its run shooting. I had the minute after I quit, I had two things happened. Oh, God, the timing was so terrible for me. In one sense, it was good. In one sense, it was bad. Before I quit, I got a call from a friend of mine who I had mentored when he first came to town, named Frank Lupo. He was a writer at Universal who got friendly with Steve
Cannell.
Steve of the Rockford Files shows, Steve Cannell. And they happened to give him an office next to Steve Cannell when he moved onto the lot. And I got him hired there because I loved the spec script he'd written, two of them actually. And he became friendly with Cannell and ended up leaving Universal with Cannell and becoming virtually his partner at Steve Cannell's company. And he was co-creator with Steve of the A-Team and 14 other shows. So the bad thing that happened was I got a call from Frank Lupo while I was still working on Whiz Kids saying, we're starting a new show, and it's kind of like Simon and Simon, and we'd love you to run it. And I can't think of the name of it. You probably know it. It's two guys on a boat
Riptide.
who are detectives. Riptide. So we'll bring you over as showrunner. And I said, Frank, I got my own show on the air. What, are you crazy? I mean, that sounds kind of interesting if I want to do a rip-off of Simon and Simon, which I don't. But I got my own show here. So he said, okay, well, you were our first choice. And like 2 days later, I quit Whiz Kids. And within another day or so, I called Frank Lupo, and I said, I'm available, Frank. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, we just hired Barb something, an actual woman, and there weren't too many in those days, writing and producing. And they hired her, and she ran the show for the whole time it was on. She apparently did a very good job. But also, I got a shot at writing a pilot the next week, and I went off and wrote a pilot for Fox while I still had my office at Universal. And when I finished that, John Stevens, who was the line producer on Whiz Kids, called me up and asked if I would do a page one rewrite on one of the last two episodes because they were in trouble. And I did that, but I don't remember which one it was.
Yeah, it was the very last episode, 18. May I take your order, please?
No, that wasn't it. That actually was an early episode that maybe didn't get played on the network until June 2, but it was one of the early ones shot, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was definitely shot earlier in the season, but I don't know why they held it, and it was the final one that was aired.
Yeah, I have a feeling it may have been preempted by a football game or a presidential speech or something. But I do remember writing of it, and I did a big rewrite on it, and I thought Alice was adorable in her uniform at the fast food place.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely was an early show, even though it wasn't aired when it should have been. But it's one of the other late ones, either Father's Day or Altera. I don't even know how you say that one. Altera.
Uh-huh.
I did a big rewrite on, and then Craig Buck came in, who I didn't know, and he didn't know me, and he did a rewrite, or he did the original script on Father's Day, mm-hmm. and we never met until about 30 years later. About 30 years later, we're now in the same writers group together, and he's a really fun guy.
Yeah, IMDb says that you're uncredited for rewrite on Altera.
That's funny because I can't even pronounce it. Well, good.
That was the one where we have Richie given a love interest finally.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to have been part of that. Yeah, I remember it vaguely. I just very vaguely.
Well, I'm sure that 35 plus years has a little bit to do with it too. Just
of course.
One of many things that you've worked on. What about any, were there any unproduced scripts that you had a hand in writing that weren't made?
No, but there was one script that it was shot, and I'm trying to figure out which one it was. This will give you an idea of the pending developing craziness of Phil. It may have been the wrong Mr. Right. I'm not sure, but one of the early scripts, this is kind of a sad, unfortunate story. I really enjoyed mentoring new young writers, and one who was a friend of mine who just couldn't quite get a break with her first writing assignment was named Lisa Seidman. And she became a rather big writer in television for years. And after working on nighttime soaps in America for years, she went and created a couple of nighttime soaps in Russia. So she had quite a career. But at this point, I don't think she had one sale yet. And she was working as a writer's assistant on the Cagney and Lacey. And she pitched a story for Whiz Kids very early on. And Phil went away on vacation while she wrote the story. She turned in the story. I thought she did a very good job on it. And I said to her, all right, I can't give you an official go-ahead to script because only Phil can do that, and he's out of the country. But it's fine with me if you want to go ahead and start writing unofficially, and when he gets back, we'll make it official. Well, she apparently didn't understand what I was saying. What I was saying was, don't tell Universal until we make it official. And instead, she went and told her agent that she just got picked up the script at Whiz Kids. So the agent called Universal, and the Universal Business Affairs said, we don't know about that. And they called me, and I tried to explain to them, but, they don't want to know things like that. So they said, well, I guess we better put her into script. So they officially put her into script without Phil's approval. And when he came back, he went through the roof because the script had been ordered without his approval. I explained to him that it was an accident, and it was a young writer, didn't understand what I said, and he was just mad. He was so mad, he refused. She turned in his script, and it was just fine. And he refused to read it. And he hired someone else, and I think it was Phil Combest, to write the script that he already had a script for. And Phil, or whoever it was, used her story that we gave him the story, and he wrote another script that was just fine. So we had completely wasted the money on the first script, and Lisa had to wait till she finally got another first script order in her life.
Yes, that would have been one of her, that was before she had any credits. Her first credit that I'm seeing is Cagney and Lacey. And of course, she went on to do big things on Dallas and Falcon Crest and big time on Young and the Restless and Days of Our Lives. So she's worked quite a bit in the industry.
Right. Yeah. She had a big career. That's great.
So as far as the legacy of Whiz Kids, do you have any idea of what direction you think the show might have gone had it gotten a second season? I know that you weren't involved at that point. But let's say that you were still on the show and writing and producing. What would you have done in a second season of Whiz Kids?
Well, if it had been on NBC or ABC Sunday at 7, I would have probably pushed to make it more lighter and comedic, because that's always the way I tend to write. And that's what I'm doing with the slightly similar show that I'm developing now. It's like Whiz Kids, but lighter and funnier, and so far with no murders. And so probably that would have been my intention. The dog story is the perfect example of that they wouldn't even let us shoot. But in actual fact, what happened is just the opposite. That the same thing that happened with the Hardy Boys, that each week when the ratings weren't high enough, the network or the studios complaining the ratings aren't high enough, we've got to get more adults to watch. How do you get more adults to watch? More murders, more gunfights, more car chases, harder edge stories, everything that I think is wrong for Whiz Kids and for Hardy Boys.
That would have been hard to do as well in that time slot, that early in the evening. To introduce, that's tonally off for the time slot.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's what happened instead when it wasn't in that time slot, when it was in a later time slot competing with other shows that had adult leads in them and were harder edged action adventures, or what we then called action adventures. Today, I don't know what you call them. They don't have the action that action adventures today do. So I'm just saying it would have been lighter in the Sunday 7 o'clock slot, and and it would have gotten hard, and did get harder and harder over the season in the 8 o'clock slot. And it introduced a whole element of spying that you probably don't even know about, and I don't quite understand. There was somebody was a spy that was doing some secret work for the government, that the plots got more and more convoluted.
From what I'm looking at, as far as all of the historical and contextual news that was going on at the time, I doubt that the following year, CBS or probably any other network would have given Whiz Kids a green light. What do you think? With all of the hacker hysteria.
We always wondered why they greenlit it. It never made sense to me that they greenlit it. And I think it was mostly to keep it away from the other networks, because I think they were afraid it would actually succeed Sunday at 7. But, who knows?
So do you think a show like Whiz Kids, as was the 1983 version, could that be done again today?
I don't know. I don't have any really answer for that. If you wanted, I understand you're focusing on the technological aspect of it, and I never really focused on that. That was just there, as far as I was concerned. That was Phil's baby.
It was sort of like Star Trek. I mean, the stories should be about people and not the warp speed and the phasers and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
That's what they always told the writers. You have to write the characters. What would the character do in this situation?
Right.
If it's all about...
And that reminds me, I don't think we ever really spent the time and energy we should have in defining our characters. I can't tell you anything. Richie, we know, is crazy about the computer and is brilliant, but I don't know anything about him other than that, and I don't know anything about the other 3 characters except their ages.
I think we're sort of introduced to them.
We should have known a lot more about them.
Right. I think we're introduced to them more in the opening sequence than in any other way. Where I mean, quite a bit is portrayed or related in that opening sequence, where you see that Andrea is the artistic side with the ballet and the playing the instrument, and we have
Richie's doing magic.
Richie's doing magic, which I don't think did we even see that in the show. That was just something that was shot.
No, not that I know of. You're absolutely right. We should have taken those 4 points from the title sequence and built them into at least certain episodes of the series. And I don't think it ever occurred to anyone to do that.
And the interviews with Phil said that the show would, if it was a hit and had continued, it would have followed the kids into college, and you could have seen them grow up into those roles.
Yeah, well, that would have been great. Once they were old enough, we wouldn't have been bound by those work rules. It would have been great for us.
But the show we got was something that many of us still remember, even though it was only on for 1 season. We got 18 episodes. It is something that those people of a certain age do recall watching on Wednesday or Saturday and enjoying that 1 hour where you could fantasize and that you were going to solve a mystery with your home microcomputer. And I think the show probably served as an ad for home microcomputers. This would have been at a time when people were just off, putting those on their Christmas list. I want a Commodore 64. I want a TRS-80. And having a show like that on television, those companies that were providing some of the equipment had to be salivating over the idea, well, this is just a 1 hour commercial for some of our products.
Yeah, sure. I noticed there were a whole lot of company credits at the end of the technology companies, although I don't think any of them is in business anymore, but it certainly was good for them. And it would have been good for kids, too, who were interested in this sort of thing.
Well, Mr. Shayne, thank you very much for being with us today on Forgotten TV and giving us all of that behind-the-scenes information that you're not going to find anywhere else. I really, really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Mattel Electronics would like to...
Mr. Television, how come all you ever talk about are sports games?
Sorry?
And television now has games like the arcade.
I know.
Rock and Chase.
Absolutely.
Tron Deadly Death. Excellent.
Right.
Night Stalker. Awesome robot.
Oh, glad you like them.
Sorry, I can't hang around here. I'm going home to play my Intellivision.
Who was that kid?
Hello? Somebody out there? E.T. Video game?
It's the video game that lets you pretend you're E.T., running away from secret agents, falling into danger, finding a phone to call home, and discovering the best thing on earth, a friend. E.T., only from Atari.
After Whiz Kids. Matthew Laberto, following Whiz Kids, starred in the 1986 Wes Craven movie Deadly Friend and made several guest appearances on shows like Highway to Heaven, Amazing Stories, Hotel, and Night Court, before transitioning to voice acting. Since 1995, he's voiced characters for Dot Hack, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and G.I. Joe series, as well as several Star Wars video games. His extremely rare on-camera appearances since include a 2014 40th anniversary Little House reunion on The Today Show and in interviews on the extras of the Blu-ray release from that year. Todd Porter was briefly promoted as a teen pinup in Tiger Beat and similar magazines after Whiz Kids, but except for a single appearance on Kate and Alley, he never acted again. He returned to his home state of New Jersey and to a private life out of the public eye, becoming a first responder and following in his father's footsteps and joining the police force for a 20-year career. His story will be heard on the next podcast installment. Jeffrey Jacquet only made one more appearance on an episode of Our House with Wilford Brimley. Following this, he left the entertainment industry and studied law at UCLA. Now going by Jeff, he has been an attorney in Southern California for nearly 30 years. Andrea Elson, after Whiz Kids, had a one-off guest appearance on Silver Spoons, then was cast as Lynn Tanner on NBC's hit show Alf for 4 seasons, from which she was finally recognized by the Youth in Film Awards with 2 nominations. Following Alf fame, she continued to make spotty guest appearances on shows like Parker Lewis Can't Lose, Mad About You, and Step by Step. Like most of her Whiz Kids co-stars, she too left the industry and later traveled the world as a yoga instructor. Now with her own yoga studio, she enjoys life with her family and dog Dyson, and her story will also be heard on the next podcast. Max Gail, after Whiz Kids, was in a number of one-off TV guest appearances until 1990, when he was cast as a series regular in the short-lived CBS sitcom Normal Life, along with Dweezil and Moon Unit Zappa. More recently, I've spotted him on CBS's Scorpion, and he currently appears on ABC's General Hospital. Now 76, he was just seen at the Santa Fe Native Cinema Film Festival, where he honored the late actor Will Sampson with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Madelyn Cain made just a couple more acting appearances on Simon & Simon and Small Wonder before changing gears and entering academia and teaching at USC for 15 years, as well as becoming a published author. Now retired, she is still keeping busy writing her 4th book, and tune in to the next podcast to hear from Madelyn. A. Martinez, immediately following Whiz Kids, was cast in the new NBC daytime drama Santa Barbara, where the role wasn't too much of a stretch from Whiz Kids. He portrayed Cruz Castillo, detective with the Santa Barbara PD, for 8 years. Since then, he's been a regular or recurring character on LA Law, Profiler, General Hospital, One Life to Live, Days of Our Lives, the Western Longmire. At age 71, he's still a very busy man. Young Melanie Gaffin continued to act for a while, voicing characters on the series Foofer and showing up on Growing Pains, Out of This World, and The Wonder Years, before leaving acting and re-entering private life, where today she keeps busy with her own family. Bob Shayne, after leaving Whiz Kids, worked on the tragically short-lived Cover-Up as a writer-producer. He penned episodes of Remington Steele, Spencer for Hire, Murder, She Wrote, and finally got his well-received return of Sherlock Holmes TV movie made, producing it himself for CBS in 1987. Although it did not get picked up as a series, it led to 2 additional UK-produced Sherlock Holmes TV movies in the very early 90s, featuring Christopher Lee. He also co-created the short-lived P.S. I Love You for CBS with Greg Evigan and Connie Selica. At 78, he's still busy, working on his current project you heard about in the interview, and we hope to see it soon on our screens. Phil DeGuere, following Whiz Kids, continued to be busy in the industry for the next 20 years. In early 1985, he served as a creative consultant on the forgotten TV favorite Otherworld, working with creator Roderick Taylor. His next project was reviving The Twilight Zone for CBS in 1985, being showrunner for the first 2 seasons and writing 3 of the episodes. The 85 Twilight Zone is an underrated interpretation of the classic series, well worth revisiting. I well recall being hooked on those Friday night episodes, and the production of this series has its own story, some of which is told in episode commentaries by Phil himself on the DVD release.
When you do an open-ended show like this, where there is no studio and there is no star and there is no formula, then an awful lot of writers suddenly appear who can write you terrific scripts.
Phil brought on board writer Harlan Ellison and director Wes Craven, as well as Whiz Kids alum James Crocker to work on the show. Stories by Stephen King, Theodore Sturgeon, Arthur C. Clarke, and Ray Bradbury were adapted. Phil, a huge Grateful Dead fan, was able to get the band to provide their interpretation of Marius Constant's original theme, familiar to any classic TV fan. The images seen in the opening were designed by Gary Gutierrez, a longtime collaborator with the Dead, providing animated sequences for their films and videos. Appropriately, the new opening sequence was projected in front of the Dead as they performed the theme during a recording session in the middle of the night. Phil also enlisted the engineers at the Computer Music Studio at Northwestern University in Illinois to add their unique psychoacoustical effect called the spatial reverberator, as well as their phase vocoder to the unique music and sound effects on the show. The show was also produced in stereo before CBS had even adopted stereo broadcasts, and well before the average viewer had equipment to appreciate it. During production, Phil offered his friend George a job as a writer on the show. George, a fellow Deadhead, was at a low point in his writing career, where he was considering becoming a real estate agent, but still didn't jump at the offer, even though a TV writing job offered better pay than he had been making writing his fantasy literature novels. When Phil threw in backstage passes to all the Grateful Dead shows George and his girlfriend would care to see, he took the job and moved from his Santa Fe home to L.A. This led to a new career in Hollywood for George, also working on Max Headroom and Beauty and the Beast. You've likely heard of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series of books he started publishing in the 90s, which became a worldwide phenomenon after being produced as the HBO series Game of Thrones. After leaving The Twilight Zone, Peter Wagg, producer of the original Max Headroom show, asked Phil to head an American adaptation of the short UK Max Headroom TV pilot for ABC. This led to him being executive producer of the very short first season of Max Headroom on ABC in 1987, again bringing on familiar names James Crocker and Joe Gannon to work on episodes. Phil then created the syndicated series Air America in 1998, starring Lorenzo Lamas. He later worked as a writer and producer on the first season of NCIS, as well as the final 3 seasons of JAG. Then, on January 24, 2005, He died at his San Francisco home of lung cancer-related causes at the far too young age of 60. As Linda Scruggs told me, one of Phil's philosophies was that he was very conscious of the influence of television, and he always wanted to instill a positive message and leave viewers feeling better than before. From his early work on Baa Black Sheep and Doctor Strange to The Twilight Zone and beyond, Phil DeGuere left us a legacy of entertainment, nearly all of which can be enjoyed at our convenience today, with one exception. Where is Whiz Kids? Before the original network run had ended, Whiz Kids started being aired overseas in the UK on ITV and other stations, as well as New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Uruguay, France, and Mexico, among possibly other countries. In the U.S., there were some very limited syndicated reruns for a couple of years. Most of the YouTube recordings are from San Francisco's KICU Channel 36, who ran it the summers of 1986 and 87. Then, domestic reruns fizzled out, and the show faded into our memories. Even the Sci-Fi Channel never reran Whiz Kids. The series has never received a home video release domestically. It is now owned by NBC Universal, parent company of Universal Television, which has seemed uninterested in releasing a great deal of content in its library. It is true that their one-season shows like Tales of the Gold Monkey and Street Hawk have been given DVD releases, but it was an outside DVD studio that licensed these shows for release. It was not NBC Universal that released them. Boutique DVD studios such as Shout Factory, Mill Creek Entertainment, and Kino Lorber have no current plans to acquire Whiz Kids for distribution. For some years now, fans online have even asked the question as to whether original film elements or even video master tapes still exist for the show. As discussed in the episode on Aftermash, effort needs to be taken to store and preserve 35mm film prints. And video master tapes as well need correct labeling, categorization, and proper storage. This takes time and effort that not all TV shows or even film releases have received, and far too many have been left forgotten in studio space storage, deteriorating over time. Incredibly, cataloging in some studio storage centers still consists of index cards and 3-ring binders. When they are retrieved, it sometimes takes expensive restorations of the film to prepare these for a new master to be used for digital release for either disc or streaming. If only videotape masters were stored, these will be subpar in quality compared to the video resolution we are used to seeing on modern DVD releases. However, even when the correct storage and preservation is done, disaster can strike.
A massive fire has broken out at Universal Studios in California. So far, there are no reports of injuries. The fire is dumping thick black smoke into the air on a backlot filled with movie sets.
We have third alarm fire in the backlot area was reported.
One of the buildings destroyed was what they called the Video Vault, where videotapes of films and TV shows were stored. Some 40 to 50,000 videotapes were destroyed in the fire by Universal's own estimate at the time, some of which may have existed only on videotape, but also notably a significant number of videotape masters for filmed TV shows in their catalog, including TV shows they were in the process of converting to digital videotape storage, which were kept in the same video vault, and which were also destroyed. Universal stored the original film elements of many of their shows elsewhere in more secure concrete-lined vaults, and some of these TV shows have been since remastered from that film. But even so, if a vintage TV show was edited on videotape, this can involve recreating episodes from film elements. A June 2019 expose by the New York Times revealed far more was lost than Universal has ever admitted to, including irreplaceable music master recordings for artists like Elton John, the Eagles, and Bill Haley and the Comets, just to name a few.
The massive fire that swept across the backlot of Universal Studios in June 2008 torched a number of famous attractions, But perhaps the most costly destruction was that of a vault containing up to 500,000 original master recordings. Bill Haley and his comments. Elton John.
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
The Eagles, just to name a few. A half-century of music history. Universal said at the time nothing was lost that couldn't be recovered.
Fortunately, nothing irreplaceable was lost. We have duplicates, and obviously there's a lot of work to replicate what's been lost, but it can be done.
Some 30 years after Whiz Kids stopped being seen in domestic reruns, there was a 2016 French DVD release by Elephant Films. France seems to have an affinity for vintage American television, and there are a number of TV series released there that have never gotten a U.S. release. However, this set omits 5 of the episodes. Why? Well, it turns out these 5 episodes never aired in France. In 1984, only 13 episodes of the series ran on Antenne 2 television, then was re-aired in 1995 on France 3. The details on why only 13 episodes were distributed in France are likely lost to time. There is speculation that episode 10, The Network, was not picked up due to its possibly controversial Cold War theme, and 13 episodes was considered a half season at the time. But whatever the reason, only 13 aired and were translated into French. This is why when Elephant Films went to license Whiz Kids for DVD release, only 13 of the episodes were included, as there are no French versions of the unaired episodes. 10 of these episodes were obtained from Universal as Apple ProRes digital files made from their videotape masters, complete with original English audio and network teasers you heard in the last podcast. But 3 are captured from 30-year-old 16mm film prints and are in French only. These are complete with lines, film scratches, and cue marks before commercial breaks. When contacting Elephant Films, they stated the 5 missing episodes, and by logical extension, the 3 they only could find French 16mm prints of, were considered lost by Universal. The circumstances as to how these became lost was not shared. Whether these were destroyed in the 2008 fire, a victim of cataloging errors, or damaged via other means over 3 decades, is not clear. They did not respond to requests for further clarification. If it is true that 3 to 8 master videotapes of episodes are lost, it is still possible Universal has original films of Whiz Kids episodes stored away they could make new video masters from, although this involves far more effort and expense to do so, as frequently the film elements require special handling to survive a new telecine scan, then digital restoration to remove film scratches, damage, dirty audio, and so on. When this is done correctly, it is possible to produce high-definition versions of old TV series that were shot on 35mm film, such has been done with Star Trek, Wonder Woman, and Man from Atlantis. Although it involves the expense of ordering it from overseas, and even though incomplete, if you have a multi-region DVD player or can play them on your computer, the French DVD release is the best way to watch the show, due to the better audio and video quality over the home video recordings floating around online. The DVD also provides the original network episode teasers that would air immediately before the show started, which have not been seen domestically in 36 years. It also includes a superficially researched 15-minute hosted documentary on the show. As far as the missing episodes, the home recordings are currently all we have. At time of recording, Whiz Kids remains the only television series Phil DeGuere produced that is unreleased on DVD in the United States. During production of this podcast, NBC Universal announced the Peacock streaming service. It is possible that in an effort to beef up the Peacock catalog, content never before released will be dug out of the NBC and Universal vaults and made available to watch. Barring one of the boutique DVD studios licensing the show for a release, this is likely the best chance of ever legitimately seeing it in the United States. If you're interested in getting it released in any way, letting Peacock, Universal Television, and Universal Studios Entertainment know on social media will make them aware of public interest in the show. Time will tell. It's incredible that somehow CBS greenlit a show prior to the summer of 1983, which would end up perfectly coinciding with the computer hacking subculture zeitgeist at the time, that would be fueled into the mainstream by the hit film War Games. That the activities of the 414s would become known by the public 6 weeks prior to the Whiz Kids premiere. That 414 member Neil Patrick would testify before Congress and make national news 9 days before the premiere. That a week after the pilot aired, the Inner Circle raids and press conference would take place. The real-life Whiz Kids activities had consequences, leading to bills being introduced in Congress the following year, meaning many of the activities depicted on Whiz Kids would become felonies. As a result, it's unlikely CBS or any other network would have touched a series featuring computer hacking Whiz Kids the following season, or any season within the next several years. I've found that for such a short-lived, now fairly obscure show, a lot of people my age tend to remember it. In fact, the impact of Whiz Kids is likely more than most people realize. During research of this podcast, I came across numerous comments from people that said the show instigated an interest in computers and technology, and many of these now work in related fields. The people from the Vintage Computer Federation were extremely quick to put together a list of notes for me, leading me to believe there were some Whiz Kids fans over there. And somebody over at HBO's Eastbound and Down must have liked the show, as it was repeatedly seen on Mexican broadcast television in its second season. Would I recommend Whiz Kids to new, uninitiated younger viewers? I hate to say it, but probably not. The only readily available way to watch it, here in the U.S. anyway, is copies of videotaped home recordings on various YouTube channels that have relatively poor video and audio quality. Currently, the pilot episode is impossible to find outside the French DVD. But if you want to delve into the show, I have set up a YouTube playlist with the intended episode order as best I can figure it. The show may also appear incredibly dated to new viewers, firmly set at the dawn of the mid-'80s, due to its prominently depicting the technology of the time and integrating it into the story. This is likely one reason for the very limited domestic reruns the show received. The San Jacinto Mall was torn down last year. The large desktop computers we once had have shrunken into compact laptops. Smartphones and tablets and compact discs are virtually a relic of the past, but our memories endure. For those of us who fondly remember Whiz Kids, it can serve as a time capsule of that brief moment in time when we were all a little more innocent, when home microcomputers were new, and we were still learning, writing computer code, dialing up our BBSs, playing computer games, perhaps occasionally getting into a little mischief, living out our electronic dreams of being David Lightman or Richie Adler. After all, wouldn't you like to be a 14-year-old Whiz Kid again? Next time on Forgotten TV. Did you think that was all there was to say about Whiz Kids? Not a chance. In the final Whiz Kids installment, hear from stars Madelyn Cain, Andrea Elson, Todd Porter, Adrienne DeGuere, and whoever else may join the fun. What was it like working on Whiz Kids? How did they get the roles? Why did they leave acting? What have they been up to since? The Whiz Kids stars speak on the next Forgotten TV. To get even more Forgotten TV, become a patron on Patreon and gain access to the Forgotten TV supplemental podcast feed. Additional podcasts that go beyond the material presented in the show. Full-length interviews before show release. Plus sneak previews of podcasts before they are openly posted. And additional goodies as they come along. For as little as $1 a month, you can support Forgotten TV and hear these additional podcasts. The link to join us over on Patreon is here in the show notes. Your funds make a difference and help me pay for accounts and services needed to pay for hosting, license music, buy DVDs, and conduct research. All the ways you can support Forgotten TV are here in the show notes. Forgotten TV was executive produced by Will Welton and Doc Pinko, with producers Eric Fusco, Julio Capa, Rich Kunkel, and Ron. Also, thanks to all who support at the $1 and $2 levels. Forgotten TV is not affiliated with or authorized by CBS, Universal Television, Elephant Films, NBC Universal, or any production company or network involved in the making of any TV show, film, or streaming service mentioned in this podcast. Links to Amazon are affiliate. All mentioned series and associated characters are the property of their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended. Audio clips are included for the purposes of review, commentary, and criticism only, and are not intended to infringe. This podcast is copyright 2020 Forgotten TV Media. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and may not reflect the opinion of Forgotten TV Media, its sponsors, or patrons. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. Information presented is based on a combination of first-hand personal accounts, period news media, and website articles. All reasonable effort has been made to fact-check the information presented. However, Forgotten TV Media cannot guarantee the accuracy of every detail included and makes no representations or warranties for the content in this podcast and cannot be held liable for errors or omissions. I've had such a great time reliving Whiz Kids and talking with cast and crew. For the last 4 months, I've poured my heart into this project, and I would first like to give Bob Shayne and Phil DeGuere my profound thanks for giving us the show in the first place, and for Bob's invaluable help in producing these podcasts. And special thanks to Madelyn Cain, Andrea Elson, Todd Porter, Max Gail, Linda Scruggs DeGuere, Adrienne DeGuere, Tammy Taylor, Robbie Rist, Paul Chihara, Craig Buck, and Wayne Correia. With additional research by Ian Dickerson, Jordan Rumsey, Jean-Francois Horvath, Sebastian Bark, Jeffrey Brace in the Vintage Computer Federation, Matt Novak at Gizmodo, and Wayne Correia. I'd like to thank the following YouTube channels for making some audio possible: The Chronic Rift, music videos and other random stuff, Mr. Ataz, Annie Chen, 11DB11, The Spirit of Orchestral Music, W.A. Mozart, Fred Vid, Old Classic Retro Gaming, Mr. Horror Lover 91, Matthew Laberto Fan, Dutch Daisy, Spee672, Europe and the United States, Game of Thrones, Stephen Brandt, Associated Press, My Saturday Mornings, FM 1156, Mauricio Benavage, WREY Tube, Beta Max, Locke 2007, Vinchus 97, and the channels that have Whiz Kids episodes: The Red City, Orion 1052-003, Retro TV, Magic Ace 4. Sources of quotes and background information were obtained from vintage issues of the following magazines: Variety, Starlog, Popular Mechanics, Enter, Newsweek, Compute, InfoWorld, Video Games, PC Magazine, Computer World, Frack, Wired, Creative Computing, as well as numerous archived newspaper articles from newspapers.com, as well as the documentary film The 414s, The Original Teenage Hackers, and the books Out of the Inner Circle by Bill Landreth, Dream Songs Volume 2 by George R.R. Martin. Also, Gizmodo's Paleo Future blog, the Movie Music International blog on cinema and television, Naked Security by Sophos, the Alt Sci-Fi blog, the BBC Archive, the La Petite Chinese blog, CNN, RedCedar.com, CNBC's Make It, File770.com, SFGate, ThePeopleHistory.com, The Verge, South Florida Sun Sentinel, and KCAL, CBS Los Angeles. The music tracks Catch Up by Falcon Dives and I Think I Was There by Emil Axelson are used under license from Epidemic Sound. Be sure to like Forgotten TV on Facebook and follow Forgotten TV on Twitter. Visit Forgotten.tv for all content and links. This podcast is written, produced, and hosted by Chris Cooling, and this has been Forgotten TV.